also terror unit vans, very coordinated, very intense, and it turns out very successful.
I think this has been an absolute phenomenal investigation by the Metropolitan Police and supported by obviously all forces UK-wide and even the security services. I think within 3 days, this individual has been captured, which just shows what a fantastic operation has been put in place. We know from experience that the police can never tell the public everything they were doing to apprehend this individual, but clearly by going wide with the media appeals and the updates in terms of descriptions clearly helped narrow down where he was. And I think this is absolutely an amazing achievement to capture him so quickly and still in London. I'm absolutely gobsmacked that he's still in London, as the previous commentator just said. You know, he had every opportunity to sort of leave London and leave the UK and didn't for whatever reason, and that is something that's going to obviously be subject to review as time goes on. But it's absolutely a tremendous effort and a tremendous result by the Metropolitan Police and everybody involved.
Yeah, Perry, there's been a lot of criticism of Wandsworth Prison and the prison staff there. How the hell did this guy get out in the first place? But on the outside world, a fantastic job. Can I ask you, as well as the two offences that Mr Khalif is facing, one under the Terrorism Act and also the bomb hoax, there now, of course, will be an additional penalty to serve, and that is for escaping prison. What kind of future do you think this guy has? How long will his sentence be, and how secure will this prison be?
Well, I think he's going to be the most guarded prisoner in the prison system once he's been returned to lawful custody. I think he'll undoubtedly be going to a Cat A prison where he'll be under the most strictest conditions, and that will be very much looked at around how much time he is allowed to either associate with other prisoners or even to have sort of recreation time. Obviously, in terms of the offences, you know, we've got the common law offence of escaping from custody. It would be down to obviously the courts to look at exactly the reasons and the motives why he's done this, but the fact he's been caught so quickly, it also would all depend on how he behaved when he was captured by the officers, whether he sort of was any remorseful and anything like that. But like you say, the prison system still has a lot of questions to answer. How he was managed to escape for so long, how he got the equipment to obviously use to escape in the van, but he'll be spending a substantial time in custody as well, on top of the offence he's already been charged with. OK, Perry Benton, former Detective Chief Inspector, thank you very much for joining us on this dramatic day on GB News Saturday. We're now joined by Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor. Mark, thank you for joining us. A hugely dramatic breakthrough here. A lot of people feared he may have jumped the country. I think actually when I spoke to you yesterday, your suspicions were much more that he was still in the local area. You were proven right. How effective and impressive do you think this police operation has been?
Well, I think it's been a good police operation. They wanted to concentrate their search activity in the London area because they weren't convinced that he had left the London area. Of course, as any nationwide search is going to encompass, that does include ports and airports. So we saw all of the enhanced security at those ports and airports and all of the delays that ensued from that. But I think the police were still working on the theory that they believed he was in the local area until they heard otherwise. And I think what this does indicate, to me anyway, is that it doesn't look like he received any kind of help from the outside or any substantial help of any measure. The very fact that he was still really in that area of West and Southwest London more than 3 days on from his escape early on Wednesday morning tells you that there clearly was nothing organised in terms of getting him out of London, because that would be the priority. If anybody had actually arranged the escape, they would want to get him away from where that significant police activity was. Now, the police activity initially really concentrated on the area that that Bidfood lorry took, the lorry that he strapped himself underneath as he left the gate undetected by those guards at Wandsworth Prison. And that took it right up to Upper Richmond Road, to the point where that was stopped. And of course, areas around there like Richmond Park got a lot of activity overnight on Thursday into Friday, and then, you know, called off on Friday morning. Then it was kind of back to the traditional sort of door-to-door inquiries, looking at CCTV from elsewhere on the route, until we got that dramatic news through yesterday evening of a confirmed sighting of him just before the Wandsworth roundabout, of him getting out or at least leaving that Bedford lorry and then walking down towards Wandsworth High Street or Wandsworth Town Centre. It was then obviously, Martin, nothing was really heard until a bit later or well into the evening on Friday night, when the search activity itself switched to the Chiswick area, and then very fast moving overnight and into this morning with lots of police activity and multiple confirmed sightings of this man. Changed his clothing by this time. He was out of his chef's uniform, that white top and the red and white checked trousers, and was instead wearing a black baseball cap, clearly in a bid to hide his face, and other dark clothing, including dark bottoms. And he was spotted multiple times in the Chiswick area. The police responded en masse, and they got their man, according to Scotland Yard, just before 11 o'clock this morning.
Mark White, thank you for joining us on this dramatic day. We can now go to Bev Turner, GB News presenter, of course, who lives in the area, was on the show earlier on, an eyewitness in the area. Bev, dramatic moments. You're out for your morning run and you stumbled into a police dragnet. Tell us what you saw and tell us what the latest is on the ground there.
Yeah, apologies for the fact that I'm still in my running kit, Martin. As you say, it has been very fast moving here this morning. We've been kept awake for 2 nights by police helicopters overhead. There's been quite a clear police presence. Teddington, Twickenham, the area in which Daniel grew up, is a couple of 3 or 4 miles down the road here from Chiswick, maybe a little more. And obviously Wandsworth Prison, again, a bit in the same direction, a different direction, but about the same sort of distance. And actually, it's been one of those cases which has really caught the imagination of people, particularly strangely teenagers in this area, that somebody was able to strap themselves to a van. A young man that went to a school nearby here, of course.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain...
See him ring 999 straight away. He's wearing black clothes from head to toe, black T-shirt, black rucksack. Don't approach him, ring 999. She said at the moment there's a very long wait to get through to 999, so please do try. And then she's put the lights on. They went over the page. Just walked past, actually, have said that they heard that he was, this is unconfirmed, but that he was found on the Dukes Avenue area near Chiswick High Road, which is where the library is, very popular with lots of children in the area. A lot of celebrities live around here. Not far from where he might have been reprimanded in the final instance. So, yeah, it's been very busy, but obviously everyone very relieved that he's been caught now at this stage.
OK, Bev, can you just give us an indication of the topography, the local area where most likely Mr Khalif had been hiding out? So it's a very wooded area, very green area, lots of places where he can get undercover in the scrub.
Yeah.
What's your theory on where the place where he got off the lorry and where he was caught and the intervening time? Where do you think he was hiding out?
I don't know Wandsworth terribly well, but there is one rumour that I've heard today that he was followed towards Kew Bridge. So if you imagine, most people are familiar with Kew Gardens, huge public park in London. Kew Gardens is a very leafy area. There are lots of bridges along this section of the River Thames where you can easily hide. There is a rumour that he was sleeping on a park bench on Kew Bridge overnight last night, unconfirmed. This is just speculation from local people in the area. There was also a rumour this morning that he'd got a car and was chased in a car, again unconfirmed. But the area is very quiet, as you can see. There is a lot of low traffic neighbourhoods around here. It's a ULEZ zone, so the roads are quite quiet. Lots of people have gardens, lots of people have driveways, lots of people have sheds and garages where it would have been easy to hide out. There are quite a lot of sports centres around here, a cricket club just over the road. We've got the Duke's Meadow area, loads of rowing clubs. It's on the west of London. We're just close to junction 1 of the M4, so you can literally just hop out here and you're out into the countryside. So it's a very nice area to live, and it is very residential, as you can see. Interestingly, Martin, in Chiswick is, or was until recently, Iran International, which is the Iranian news channel, and that actually was forced to close because of the terrorist threats against the journalists working at the Iran channel in Chiswick. So Chiswick does have this connection to some Iranian politics. I have no idea whether that is connected to Daniel Khalif in any way. As Mark was just saying, it very much seems like he was probably working on his own, perhaps. If there was somebody waiting to scoop him up, you think he might be on a boat overseas by now. He was obviously living rough for a few days, but that would not have been difficult in this area. And of course, with this beautiful weather, it wouldn't have been entirely unpleasant. No doubt his adrenaline will have been pumping for the last few days. There's no doubt about it. I was interested to hear that comment by one of the people that he was in prison with, saying that he always wanted to be famous. Well, he's got that now.
It certainly is. Bev Turner, thank you for the update live from Chiswick. Always working on your day off. That's what I love about you. Thank you very much for joining us on GB News Saturday. Joined now in the studio by former Metropolitan Police Detective Peter Blexley, good friend of the show. Peter, dramatic day, but as a former copper, you got to say a great result, a job well done, an intensive search, air, water, land. The boys in blue, they brought the bacon home.
And the girls.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, mate.
Well done, the Metropolitan Police.
Yeah.
Very good. And huge congratulations and thanks to those public-spirited members of the public who rang 999, who gave that information, because it seems pretty clear to me there has been a significant input from the good people of Chiswick and other parts of West London. So a very big thank you to them as well. And I sincerely hope that one of them, as we speak, is claiming that £20,000 reward that the Metropolitan Police offered yesterday for information leading directly to his arrest. I sincerely hope that is claimed.
It's interesting because I live by another park in Peckham. Police helicopters are often in the air for all sorts of searches, but this was clearly very, very coordinated. On local next door groups, messages I've been following throughout the early hours here, I was saying there were helicopters and there were river boats. They were shining lights into an area of the bank. There were terror units, terror unit vans there, an entire police dragnet, a coordinated, joined up and very powerful investigation when it came to the end game.
And probably mobile CCTV cameras with a facial recognition capability, because the Met have deployed those fairly sparingly and in a very targeted manner. This would have been a perfect sort of operation for that. But now is the time for everyone, and I mean the public and the media, to take a collective deep breath.
Yep.
Because Mr. Khalif has not been convicted of anything.
Not yet.
Those 3 charges that he faces were due to be heard in court in November.
That's right.
We must all, including the public, we must not say anything in the mainstream media or on social media that would potentially jeopardise a fair trial. I am sure everybody wants to see that happen. So please exercise restraint, everyone.
Just in terms of what those charges are, it's Khalid attempted to elicit information about an individual who was or had been a member of His Majesty's forces, which was of a kind likely to be useful to a person committing or preparing an act of terrorism. That's the Section 58A Terrorism Act offence. And of course, the second one was the bomb hoax by placing an article with intent. Those charges are being faced in November. But back to
and also a breach of the Official Secrets Act. But they are charges. Nothing has been proven yet, and it needs to go in front of a court, and the whole justice system needs to run its course.
Yeah. In terms of, we were speaking there with Perry Benton, he will now face a stern, stiff, additional sentence of escaping prison. So he's going to be very, very highly guarded, very highly protected. perhaps getting the sort of security he should have had before he was released into Wandsworth.
Yeah, he may face a charge of escaping from lawful custody. That is entirely possible, but of course the police, with the ongoing investigation, will consult with the Crown Prosecution Service, who ultimately will make a decision on any further charges that he may face. And once again, he mustn't be convicted in the court of public opinion. However, what is inevitable is that he won't be going back to Wandsworth prison because he's already successfully escaped from there once. So I suspect he might find himself in Belmarsh, which is, of course, a Category A prison and has astonishing levels of security. And I'm sure Mr. Khalif, should he be so minded, would not be able to escape from there.
Well, I don't think a single prisoner has ever escaped from Belmarsh. It takes hours to get into the place. In fact, lawyers often complain it takes so long to get in. They miss parole meetings inside. Perhaps Mr. Khalif should have been in a prison like that all along.
Yes, I think those questions are rightfully already being asked, and we'll see what the investigation bears forth. I'd be very interested to find out how he sourced those straps, because remember, the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, did say to Parliament on Thursday straps were found underneath that lorry. So that investigation now must run its course. The answers will become public at some stage in the future, but for now, back in custody, where of course he should have been all the time, and many of those police officers can stand down, and possibly all the inevitable huge amount of resources perhaps can be deployed to combating some other types of crime.
I was talking to Chip Chapman there, former armed service man, about the residual risk of the sort of information that Mr. Khalif may have got his hands on, secrets for UK eyes only, intel, crypto, military comms. How much of a pressing matter do you think that would be for the police to make sure that those loopholes are closed?
Well, the Army employed him, so I'm sure the Army will have reviewed their systems after he was dismissed by them, because he was dismissed a few months ago. I'm not a military man and I can't really speak for them, but it makes absolute sense that if a member of the armed services is charged with offences, that they will then review their systems to say, how could this have come about?
Now, obviously you're speculating about the £20,000 reward, but as a former police officer yourself, how do you think these officers will be feeling about this hugely successful, very high-profile capture today?
Job done.
Yeah.
I think ministers will be as relieved as anybody, because imagine if the worst case scenario had happened and Mr. Khalif had popped up at a press conference in Tehran, for example. That would have been hugely embarrassing, absolutely catastrophic. But of course, that is not the situation. He was found in West London. So there'll be a lot of relieved people, but of course there will still be red faces, particularly within the prison service, who basically committed a schoolboy error in prison terms in allowing this man to escape in the manner that he did.
Precisely. I think a lot of people were concerned that Daniel Khalif may become a prize asset for Iran. The nightmare scenario of a photograph with an Ayatollah. But he didn't make it as far as Tehran. In fact, he didn't even make it as far as Tooting. It was a superb operation. So you've got to feel happy about this today.
Yeah, I'm delighted for them. I'm absolutely delighted. They did attract some criticism earlier on today in the media, which I found surprising. I mean, I've been renowned for putting my size 12s up the rear end of police forces when they've not done what they should have done. But in this regard, it is very much job done, stand down, and maybe some of them might just go to the pub this evening.
We'd hope so. Peter Bleksley, thank you for joining us on GB News Saturday. We're going back now to Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor. Mark, what's the latest? You have an update for us?
Yes, just in terms of the search operation, which is clearly scaling back now that their man is in custody. We've seen a lot of activity around Chiswick this morning. There is now door-to-door inquiries and investigations that are taking place in that area to determine exactly where Daniel Khalif was, whether he was actually holed up in any sort of building or in parkland around that area. That clearly is now a sort of an urgent strand of the investigation, because what they want to do is to try to rule out any third-party involvement in this young man's escape. There is no suggestion at this stage that a third party has helped him. Clearly, the investigation about the manner of his escape from Wandsworth Prison on Wednesday morning will involve an investigation into whether he had any help from either prisoners or indeed prison staff in that escape bid. Thereafter, though, it seems from what we're seeing, the very fact he's still really in a kind of local area in that sense, not that far from Wandsworth, where he was eventually arrested a few days on. It doesn't seem that there was any coordinated third-party help in getting this young man out of this area, but all that will be gone into in the fullness of time. It was interesting when you were speaking to Peter about the issues surrounding these terror prisoners and where they are housed. That is now a matter of an urgent review. The Justice Secretary Alex Chalk has said that he has asked for a list of all the terror prisoners on the prison estate right across the country, because clearly what he wants to try to ascertain is whether any other terror prisoners are being held in lower category, Category B prisons. And if that is the case, has the proper risk assessment been done on them? Because it's clear that they feel that with terrorist prisoners in particular, then the highest security prisons are the prisons that they should really be in, Cat A prisons such as Belmarsh. It is without doubt undeniable now that obviously having escaped once from a Category B prison, that when Daniel Khalif is returned, it will be to a Category A prison. It may well be Belmarsh as he awaits that trial, which was scheduled for November of this year, facing 3 charges, one of planting hoax bomb devices at a military base, another of trying to elicit information that would be useful to a terrorist, and then that third charge that was added to the charge sheet on the 21st of July this year when he appeared at the Old Bailey, a charge which seems to be more serious in nature, a breach of the Official Secrets Act and gathering of information useful to the enemy, to a hostile state. And that hostile state, we understand, is Iran. As well as those 3 charges, again, it's inevitable there will be another charge of escaping from lawful custody that will be added to that. I think the trial, which, as I say, was due for November, is likely to be knocked back quite a bit, because a defence team is going to argue that given all the publicity around his escape and everything that has been said, that it would be difficult to give him a fair trial so early, so soon after this escape. So I'm sure that it's going to be knocked into the new year.
OK, Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor, thank you for joining us for that update on this dramatic day, the arrest, the apprehension of Daniel Khalif, now back in custody where he belongs, and it's a story we'll be following throughout the show. OK, a change of pace now altogether. Join me now is political commentator and writer Matthew Stadlen and research fellow at the Bow Group, Benjamin Laughlin. The big question today is the following, and that is, can Rishi Sunak, can the Tories win the next general election? In the newspapers today, it has to be said, guys, that Rishi Sunak is saying that he's very confident he can win the next election. He would say that, wouldn't he? That's the first thing. But he's talking, Matthew, he's talking about the fact that people are not that impressed with Keir Starmer. There is still hope. I've got to say, I put this out onto social media earlier, and most of the people that follow me are very Brexity, very Conservative. They don't think he's got much of a hope. Matthew, where do you sit?
I follow you as well, Martin.
You do?
I'm not very Brexity.
You troll me.
I do not troll you. Listen, Rishi Sunak saying he's going to be very confident about winning the next election is rather like an England rugby fan saying we're very confident that we're going to win the World Cup. It's not going to happen. I can tell you that now. But Rishi Sunak is in India at the moment, really important meeting of international leaders, and he will be absolutely delighted that this fugitive has been apprehended, because as a metaphor for Tory Britain, the idea that prisoners are escaping, that schools are collapsing or crumbling.
Yeah.
It could not be any worse. So Rishi Sunak, I think he had a date night last night with his wife. He will be absolutely dancing a jig, because if this had gone on any longer, the headlines would have got worse and worse.
In fact, you're a mind reader, because we just had a statement there. The Prime Minister has responded to Daniel Cunliffe's arrest, saying he's very pleased. Let's have a listen.
Well, I'm very pleased with the news, and my thanks to the police officers for their fantastic work over the past couple of days, but also to the public, who came forward with an enormous number of leads to help the police in their inquiries. It's good news that we've recaptured the person concerned. As people already know, the Justice Secretary has initiated an inquiry into the circumstances of his escape, and that work will continue. But this is obviously very welcome news, and again, my thanks to the police, but also to the public for their help.
So, Benjamin, Matthew, let's get some reaction on that. Benjamin, to you. A little bit of good news for Rishi, in that he was stood down by President Modi, had to take his wife out for a curry. Long way to go for a curry. It must be jubilant, though, that this is a good bit of good news. Law and Order, it seems, is in shape.
Well, it's great news for him that he's been caught, but it's terrible news that he escaped in the first place. And I don't think people forget that. You know, the fact that a prisoner was able to get out and be on the streets as a danger to the public, potentially, for, what was it, 3 or 4 days, that isn't good. It doesn't look good for the government. As Matthew said, it is a terrible metaphor for broken Britain, which is what we currently live in. But to your point about whether they can win the election, I think they can, but they don't have the confidence in order to do it. I do think there would be a way for them to win, but they seem to have given up. The number of Tory MPs who are standing down this time round isn't a very good sign, is it?
Yeah, there's a blizzard of by-elections coming up, when they look like they're going to be foregone conclusions, potentially. Sunak in this article points to Uxbridge, where there was a clear difference between Labour and the Conservatives. That, of course, was a referendum on ULEZ. The 2019 general election was a referendum on Brexit, ostensibly, and Jeremy Corbyn. Those issues don't exist now, though, do they? These wedge issues. And I guess, isn't that a problem? What's the difference between the Tories and the Labour Party?
Well, I do think Brexit's still an issue that people care about, but no one necessarily trusts Rishi Sunak or the current government, really, to believe that much in Brexit in the way that they did Boris Johnson in 2019. I don't think Rishi really cares that much about delivering Brexit in the spirit of why people voted for it. So I don't think it will be that big of an issue in the next election. I think bigger issues such as the culture war issues are what they're going to focus on. They're going to push stuff down the, you know, the gender critical sort of line in order to kind of distract from the fact that the economy's in the gutter, inflation is in a death spiral, schools are collapsing, prisons are, you know, not holding their prisoners properly. I mean, the country is fundamentally broken on a mass scale, and so I think they'll distract and focus on the culture wars.
Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, you bring up Uxbridge. Don't forget that the Tories lost the other 2 by-elections that happened at the same time. At least one of them. They got absolutely hammered, didn't they? Well, a massive overturning of a majority. Also, ULEZ, some people will start to suggest, and have been trying to suggest, that Labour would try and extend ULEZ around the country. ULEZ is not going to be a wedge issue at the next election. And don't forget that Rishi Sunak's government is the government that wrote into law our commitments on net zero. So there isn't that much difference between Labour and the Tories there. I said earlier that, of course, the Tories aren't going to win the next election. It isn't impossible. And for pundits such as ourselves to try to guess, I mean, it is a fool's errand. We want to try to do our best. Could it be like 92? People expected Labour to win in 92. They didn't. Do you remember that headline? Could the last person to leave Britain turn the lights
Neil
out? Neil Kinnock lost. It is not impossible that we have a rerun of 92, but I don't think it will be 97. I think it will be more like 2010. We'd had 13 years of New Labour by then. We've had 13 years of this Conservative government, initially with the Lib Dems now. I think people are tired, but were people energised by Cameron and Osborne in 2010? Not enough for them to get an overall majority. Are people energised by Starmer, as they were by Blair in 97? No, they're not. So we need to see more from the Labour leader now, so that people don't just vote against the Tories or don't turn out, but they actually vote positively for Labour.
Great. Matthew Sadden, Benjamin Loughlin, I'm afraid we have to leave it there. We have a big breaking news day, but thank you. I think, really, if the Tories want to win, they need to be Conservative. They need to start doing things like actually stopping the boats, actually bringing down tax, and all things they promised, but that's just my 2 pennies worth. Because join me now to discuss the dramatic arrest of Daniel Cunliffe is retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector and crime consultant Hamish Brown. Hello to you, Hamish. A dramatic day.
Good afternoon to you.
A dramatic day. Mr. Khalid finally back in custody where he belongs. What lessons do you think we can learn from this? Let's start with his transfer to Wandsworth, which many have criticised as an accident waiting to happen.
Well, I think we've got to go back to the beginning, really. Someone have given him a risk category. We're not here to talk about the actual offences because he's entitled, like anyone else, to a fair trial on that. But, you know, for a 21-year-old who's alleged to have committed those, what level do you put him at? He was seen as category B, went to Wandsworth Prison. Some will say, given the nature of some of the charges, it should have been category A and Belmarsh. They'll be having a good think about that. I would imagine that's where he'll be going when he returns to prison. Won't be very welcome back at Wandsworth, I wouldn't have thought. The next thing is, how on earth did all this happen? Why was he working in the kitchens, which is a trusted position? He'd only just got into prison. He found himself there. And indeed, what planning went into this beforehand, and unfortunately, did anyone assist him? We just don't know, and the police will have to look at that. So that's all about the prison. But what we've got to look at is the police operation after that. Oh, great news, really. They were sensible. They put out what releases they wanted to. Yes, they want the media to help them, but sometimes they can't say too much. But what did go out, and in fact, I said it this morning, if you got any information, get hold of the police. And that's exactly what the good people of Chiswick did. So a big thank you to them, and the police could use their resources, could use their intelligence, and hopefully the man was arrested without too much fuss and no one got injured.
And Hamish, as well as the local intel, friends of mine who live in the area say they were kept awake for most of the night by police helicopters. There are also police riverboats on the Thames around the Chiswick Bridge area, combing the banks, and also there were terror response units there, a very joined-up approach. What kind of other intel do you think the local police force would have been using? There's been talk of CCTV, facial recognition cameras. Are they out there? And is that something that we should be perhaps concerned about? Are we all being watched all the time? Hamish. I think Hamish has frozen. Let's come back to the studio because we've still got Matthew and Benjamin. Matthew, it's obviously a fast-moving story, but one thing that Peter Blexley mentioned, which I was really fascinated by, was, I mean, look, Sadiq Khan's got how many ULEZ cameras in? Now, London is covered in cameras. You can't move without being facially identified, it seems. Is that something, obviously, in this case, it's a positive boon if we can apprehend a wanted suspect who's on the run, but are those kind of cameras something that you think is an issue for ordinary, everyday people being watched as they go about their daily business?
I'm just incredibly surprised it has taken this long in 2023 to apprehend someone who is in prison awaiting trial.
Yeah.
I cannot believe it. If you park on a yellow line or you speed or whatever it is, you go into a yellow box in the middle of the street, you are going to get a letter through the post before you can say Jiminy Cricket. So the fact that this guy was on the run for as long as he was in our capital city with the full weight of this British state trying to find him, I find absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, Benjamin, I'm sure you would echo that. I mean, perhaps if Sadiq Khan's ULEZ cameras have been responsible, people might cut him a bit of slack. But it is true to say that, you know, you can't do anything in London without being photographed or nicked. Yeah. So it seems extraordinary now. Of course, initial theories were that he had jumped the country, was a prize asset in Tehran, of Iranian descent, had been leaking information to the Iranians allegedly. But now it just turns out he was kind of living rough for a few days in London and yet hadn't been caught.
It's slightly embarrassing, I think, that it took so long. But I would love if it came out that the reason he got caught was because he drove a 2014 diesel into a low-traffic neighbourhood. That'd be a brilliant little detail to finish the story off.
OK, we can now return back to Hamish Brown. We lost him there. Sorry, we had a technical grounding. Hamish, are you there? Can you hear us?
I'm not sure at what stage I was cut off, but
okay, I
was thanking the good people of Chiswick anyway for their cooperation. So well done to them.
Yeah, and I wanted to get from you the other intel, because of course we heard there were lots of police helicopters up from about 3 a.m. till dawn, combing the area around Chiswick Bridge, the Grove Park, Chiswick area was entirely under surveillance. And then when you look at the aerial photographs, it became a very, very concentrated search on the kind of north bank of the Thames there. There were boats, there were terror units. It seemed very, very highly trained in. So as well as the kind of air, sea and land, if you guess, not Thames in the sea, but you get my point, very great deployment of police resources. One thing that Peter Bleksley mentioned to me that I found fascinating was the use of facial recognition CCTV cameras. How widespread are they in London? Obviously, it's good news in cases like this, but is that something we should be worried about, this surveillance nation aspect of this story?
Well, those are two sides of the coin, aren't they? The public want protecting. They want the likes of this gentleman found, quite rightly so. And at the same time, there are those who are saying, well, you know, what about Big Brother and that sort of thing? Is this good enough, and shouldn't there be more safeguards? So it's a little more difficult issue, perhaps. But we are getting used to this. And in fact, if you, goodness knows, if you walk down Oxford Street or something, I think you're filmed hundreds of times, and it will be something similar around the country in major shopping areas and things like that. And overwhelmingly, it's come up good for the police, the public, and indeed common sense. But I acknowledge the shortcomings. I acknowledge the people's concern. But you know, there has to be placated. We're living in a complicated age, perhaps, and all these help. So you've got to make use of the technology, everything to hand, be sensible about it, keep it in the law. I think be open with the public what the police have. Please let them comment. We can debate it. But at the end of the day, what we want is the police to keep people safe. That's what's happened. An excellent job by the police. They used all the facilities to hand, and actually the job has begun and ended pretty quickly with a very satisfactory result. And what's going to happen now is the police are going to move on with their day-to-day work and just get on with it. So headline news today, but it won't be in a few days' time.
Hamish, I wanted to ask you about the rivalry or whatever it may be between different services. We'd all like to think, of course, that the prison service are working hand in glove in harmony with the police service. But how much of a sense do you think there may be of the police had to mop up the prison service's mess here?
Well, that's a little unkind, perhaps. We'll have to wait and see what comes out of the investigation, and the prison authorities will know that. It won't be a matter of rivalry at all, and the police work closely with the National Probation Service, as indeed they'll work with the prison service, and each know, you know, if there's a possibility that a crime has been committed, and we don't know if that's the case at Wandsworth Prison, a very much understaffed prison where the prison officers are under huge amount of pressure. It might have been a simple mistake, it might have been something more than that. So we'll have to see what comes from that. But I'm pretty confident that the prison service will want to move on, and if they got it wrong, that will have to be put right. And if something criminal happened, the rank and file will want that sorted out as well. So I hope the investigation can be done quickly and everyone can get back to the jobs they should be doing.
OK, Hamish Brown, retired Scotland Yard Detective Inspector and Crime Consultant. Thank you for joining us on this dramatic day. Cutting back to the studio now, gentlemen. Still got Matthew Stadlen, Benjamin Loughlin here. Benjamin, what do you make of this notion? I think it's something that maybe a lot of people aren't aware of, that we are being facially scanned all of our time when we move around cities. And I guess the upshot is that we can apprehend, you know, bad guys, but the downside is, are we being watched and facially monitored in a way I think a lot of people may have concerns about?
Yeah, I think it's a terrible idea, this increase in cameras and so on and so forth. It goes against basic principles of liberty and privacy. But the fact that they couldn't even catch the bad guy, the one good positive thing that should come out of it, they couldn't use. But really, the main problem I have with this whole story is to do with the prisons. So firstly, this man should never have been in Wandsworth. It's a lower category prison. And I'm wondering if that's something to do with overcrowding. You know, he should have gone to Belmarsh, and questions need to be asked about why he was placed in Wandsworth. If it was an issue of there not being enough space, that is absolutely the responsibility of the government. They haven't done enough in order to increase prison spaces and invest properly in keeping people safe.
Yeah, Matthew, that's a fair point. If you think about the nature of the allegations here, serious cryptographic methods, comms leaks potentially to Tehran, an enemy of Britain. If that was, happening, that's a serious thing for somebody to do. And why would they be in a Category B jail like Wandsworth, where there have been plenty of escapes in the past, and also being given a cushy job in a kitchen with access to weapons and access to deliveries ins and outs? A catalogue of errors need to be addressed in this inquiry moving forward.
Clearly, though, really important questions to be asked of the prison service. But if we pan back, take the camera out a bit, have a wide-angle look at this for a second, and we return to where we started, there is a political dimension to this. And the question for me is, will the public link this story to what it thinks of this Conservative government? Maybe they'll brush it off, it was a dramatic escape, and they'll have been gripped by it, as we all have been. But it does risk being yet another metaphor for what a lot of people, I think, are now calling broken Britain. And when you are the ruling party, whether you are or you are not directly responsible for everything that goes wrong, it is nonetheless on your watch. And the narrative is developing that Britain is no longer working. People are struggling with bills. The borders are seen as porous. If the prisons can't even hold on to their prisoners, I think that could be very damaging and, in the end, damning for the Tories at the next election.
Yeah. Well, we started this section, Benjamin, with that question, can the Tories win the next election? We saw Rishi Sunak's statement there from New Delhi. He seems very happy that the police have done their job. Of course he will be. But Matthew's point there, a Tory central pillar used to be firm on law and order. If our prisons are porous, if our borders are porous, if we have at least 19 known terrorists in the UK that have come in illegally and a terror suspect has escaped from one of our jails, what do you think that's going to say to the electorate come that important time when they go to put their cross in the box in the next general election?
Well, this is supposed to be the party of law and order. They definitely are not that. When you combine this with what's going on in the Channel, people just coming in wantonly, not being returned, then you see people escaping from prisons, you see justice has gone out the window, you've got the backlog in the courts, for example, where cases drag on forever and ever and never actually end up, being resolved. It looks to me that the Conservative Party have lost control of law and order. They can't claim to be the party of law and order ever again after the way that they've behaved over the past few years.
Final word to you, Matthew.
Yeah, just arguably, some of what we're seeing at the moment is chickens coming home to roost from policies of austerity under Cameron and Osborne. Now, Sunak wasn't a prominent figure back then, but the Tories have been, in one form or another, in number 10 for 13 years. If you don't fund, and there's a big political and economic debate about austerity, I was against it, but if you don't resource prisons, if you don't resource the police service, then in the end, the country starts to come apart at the seams. And I think the electorate will be aware of that. But I do come back to what I said earlier as well. We need to see more of what Starmer and Labour stand for, and I think we'll start to see that in the coming weeks and months.
OK, Matthew Stoughton, Benjamin Loughnane, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining me today on GB News Saturday on this dramatic breaking news day. Of course, Daniel Khalif has just been apprehended, and joining me now to discuss this further is Norman Brennan, good pal of mine, former London police officer and director of Law and Order Foundation. Norm, so a fantastic result for the Metropolitan Police, who are often under fire. How does it make you feel as a former copper to have seen such a dramatic apprehension?
Well, the police have done their job, and they've done their job very well indeed. But they did their job a year or so ago when they arrested this individual. Look, it'd be great today if everybody just started poking the finger at the prison service, at anyone else, politicians. We have a system within Britain on law and order that's broken. Policing is broken. Our courts are broken. The probation service. And as we can see here, Martin, in relation to Wandsworth Prison, they had 50 less officers on duty that day. They had about 79 instead of about 130. They were housing 1,700 instead of 900. What could go wrong? And what could go wrong rarely goes wrong within the prison service. I mean, I take my hat off to prison officers. They do a fantastic job. Rarely does anyone escape. And I think the lesson that we need to learn today, Martin, is this, is why did this happen? How can we avoid it in future? And it's clearly that we need to invest in policing and the prison service, which have both been absolutely drained of resources over the past decade. And the chickens are coming home to roost.
Yeah, Norman, how much do you think the sorry saga of Daniel Khalif was just an accident waiting to happen? Are you there, Norman?
Clear that, yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, mate, go ahead.
Yeah, it's clear. It's clear that something went wrong, but we don't live in a perfect world. Things go wrong all the time. And what makes me sick and tired of Britain, Martin, which sadly is broken, and many of us know that now, and I'm ashamed to say that policing and the criminal justice system is broken. I dedicated most of my life to it. But what do we do about it? All we've got is the opposition party and the party in power at the moment are like two football teams. One is on the pitch, kicking the ball all around. They miss a goal, so the other team, which is Labour, are on the sideline saying, you're crap, you're Lucius, you should have passed, you should have done that. But they get on the pitch, and guess what the Conservatives highlight? All of their anomalies and all of their faults. I think it's time for all the fists and bear baiting within Commons to cease. And people put their hands out to the opposition and said, let's work together to build Britain great again. Because the more people blame each other, and today it will be a blame game, the focus is taken off repairing what is broken.
Norman, you are speaking words of common sense there. I can hear people in GB Newsland raising a glass to you. As the director of the Law and Order Foundation, Norman, what would you do to fix policing?
I'll tell you what I'd do. I'd recruit 20,000 new police officers, brand new, over and above the 22,000 that we lost. I would then put my hand out to recently retired, experienced police officers and recruit 2,000 to 5,000 of those to return on a 2 to 3 year contract to train up these new youngsters, because we've got youngsters training youngsters now. And I would, as the Commissioner or the Home Secretary, tell every police officer to get out on the streets, interact with the public, put your hand out, show that you really are their friend. Go into shops, put your hands out to them, challenge those that break the law, put them before the courts, and actually get back what we've lost. And that's the public trust and the public's respect, because the longer the blame game goes on, the more the focus will be diverted away from what is broken. And unless we start rolling our sleeves up and starting to fix it, I'm afraid we won't break that circle, Martin.
Norman Brennan, you know, what can I say? You're speaking the essence of common sense. In fact, I've still joined in the studio by Matthew Staddon and Benjamin Laughlin. They didn't want to leave. That was so compelling. I'm going to come back to you guys now. I mean, what an impassioned idea of how we can fix this broken system, Matthew.
So just two very important things I think that Norman brought up. One I agree with and one I disagree with. The thing that I agree with is we need more police officers. For a period of time after those savage cuts that brought about under the Tory government, we seem to be almost a policeless society. That doesn't mean there aren't thousands of good...
Isn't blaming the Tories exactly what
well, I'm going to come to that.
Yeah, I'm going
to come to that point. It looked as though we just didn't have any police on the streets. And that's probably because we didn't. So I would encourage there to be more police officers. I live in central London. I've lived in central London all my life. I've never seen levels of antisocial behaviour that we are seeing at the moment. I want to see police dealing with that. You can't deal with it unless they're properly resourced. That's point one, so I agree with Norman on that. Where I disagree with him on is, yes, of course, the Commons can look like Punch and Judy, and that's not a very attractive look often, but we can't have the government and the opposition just holding hands. Part of living in a democracy is about scrutinising the government, and that is the very definition of what the opposition party, as well as us in the media, is about. So we do need scrutiny.
OK, Benjamin, another thing that Norman talks about, Peter Bletchley talks about a lot of former coppers, you may say, of a different generation. Let's get back to proper policing, not the graduates, not those who kind of seem more concerned about policing tweets as opposed to policing streets. Perhaps some former veterans got in there, a bit of proper backbone. Is that a route forward?
Well, when the police were first founded, it was largely ex-veterans, people who were retired army officers and so on and so forth, who became the police. And they had the necessary experience to do common-sense policing within communities. You know, the old idea of bobbies on the beat, going around. They were a preventative measure by being in the communities, by being a presence. People wouldn't then commit crimes because they were there. They could see the police officers and they knew. And, you know, Chesterton always said there should be a policeman on every street corner but not down your chimney. So they shouldn't cross into your home, but they should be there when you need them, so you can go out and call for them.
And what about this kind of broken window style approach? We hear a lot about. You're saying there's lots of low-level background noise, crime, graffiti, vandalism, antisocial behaviour. You can't escape that sort of stuff in any urban area now. Is that the answer, to stop clamping down on all the small crimes, so we actually have a fear of the police, a respect of the police, which seems to be completely gone?
Yeah, not fear, but respect. And we don't want to cross into a society where we are overly surveilled. We don't want to cross into a society where we become a police state. Not that there's much danger
Sounds like
of
we're
that.
in it.
Well, what we do want, common sense is what common sense means different things to different people. What we do want is fair, robust, respectful policing. And Suella Braverman, and I'm not a fan of the Home Secretary in any shape or form, but she did say recently that all thefts, didn't she, were going to be investigated. You have to have the confidence in civil society that if you are burgled, that if someone comes and mugs you on the street, or antisocial behaviour more generally, that this sort of stuff is taken seriously. Because if you let the little stuff go, then the big stuff happens almost inevitably.
Absolutely agree. We can now cut back to Mark White, GB News Home and Security Editor. Mark White, do you have the latest update for us from the situation on the arrest of Daniel Khalif?
Well, no real update really as such, other than that he has now been taken into custody, where he will be questioned, processed and put into a higher security prison than the one he was in. I was struck, though, listening there to Matthew and about the issue really of funding over the last decade or more since the Conservatives came to power, and those austerity years, and the fact that those cuts are now coming home to roost. I think he has a real point there. We are seeing it in multiple areas of the public sector, but particularly when it comes to law and order. We're seeing it in the court services, where they are struggling to process court cases. There's a massive, massive backlog that was only exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. We see it in the prison service, where there was a huge cut in the number of prison officers. You've got the government now saying that we're 4,000 extra officers since 2017. Yes, but that doesn't take into account the fact that many more than that were let go during the austerity years. And what you have now in the prison estate are many thousands of very young and inexperienced prison officers who are trying to do the job that older, more experienced people with all of the knowledge that you need working in a very volatile environment no longer have, because many of them have left the service. They are fewer in number. They are trying to deal with very overcapacity prisons, crowded prisons like Wandsworth, which is 1,700 inmates, which is about 800 more than it's certificated for. And in doing that, there are fewer of those officers trying to manage more officers. And of course more inexperienced officers as well. And it's the same with the police. You know, even though we've had 10,000 additional police officers who have come back into the service in recent years, they are young and inexperienced officers. And the older hands, you know, the people like Norman, he's left a few years ago now, but those older, more inexperienced officers are no longer in the service. So you may have this kind of drive to now recruit after these austerity years, but it's very, very difficult to undo the damage. However, the government might package that as being absolutely necessary given the financial situation that the country faced at that time. The damage undoubtedly was done in those years, and having to cut services back very significantly.
Okay, Mark, Rishi Sunak has delivered a statement from New Delhi. He was hoping to make his weekend and the coming days about a trade deal with India. I'm afraid it's now solely about law and order politically. Do you expect this to become a major attack point from the Labour Party? We're seeing the Labour Party very much on a front foot with very aggressive social media attacks in recent days all week long. Do you think now they will go in hard on a broken law and order and a broken prison system?
That is a really good point, and I think absolutely that will be a next attack area. We've had it for weeks, months now on immigration. That will continue to be an area that Labour pushes, rips open that festering sore that the government has never been able to really heal in terms of the numbers that continue to keep coming across the channel. But yes, law and order is a big issue. If you go into the inner cities, they're grappling with a violent crime problem, not just knife crime, but violent crime in general. There is all of the issues of police officers and police forces not doing perhaps what they did 10, 20 years ago in terms of the community policing approach.
Mark White, I'm afraid we have to cut you short there because it's the end of the hour. We'll go into the weather, but please stay with us. We'll be right back with a dramatic update on the arrest of Daniel Khalif.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a fairly hot week across the UK and not a huge amount changing throughout this weekend. We've got those isobars fairly spread out, so bringing us some light winds and still bringing that air up from the south, so fairly warm as well. We've seen some heavy showers and thunderstorms throughout today, and they will slowly ease away as we go through tonight. So leaving a fairly dry night for many, though a bit of rain and drizzle across the far northwest. Though as we go into the early hours of Sunday morning, an area of heavy showers and thunderstorms starting to push into the southwest, and that's all during another warm and humid night. So to start Sunday morning, those showers will make their way northeastwards into Wales, the Midlands, and later on into northern England, Northern Ireland, and into southern Scotland. And they could be pretty heavy, bringing some hail and thunderstorms, as well as some strong gusty winds. So do keep an eye on the forecast if you are out and about in these areas tomorrow. But it will be another warm day, especially in the southeast, with highs of 32. Now looking towards the new working week, a bit of mist, fog and low cloud in the west to start, but this area of rain will slowly erratically spread its way southeastwards, with some thunderstorms as well developing just ahead of that. And that changeable autumnal theme continuing as we go through the rest of next week, with temperatures slowly declining back down to average.
A brighter outlook with Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon and welcome to GB News Saturday. I'm Martin Daubney. For the next 2 hours, I'll be keeping you company on your TV, online and, of course, on your digital radio. Coming up this hour, we'll continue to bring you the latest after the dramatic arrest of terror suspect Daniel Khalif following his escape from Wandsworth Prison on Wednesday. The Prime Minister says he's very pleased while Labour is demanding answers on how he escaped prison in the first place. And still, do get in touch. Send me your thoughts on GB Views at gbnews.com, or, of course, message me on our socials. Of course, we're at GB News. But first, it's your news with Tamsin.
Martin, thanks very much, and good afternoon from the GB Newsroom. It's 1 o'clock. The Prime Minister says he's very pleased terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been arrested after escaping from HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. Rishi Sunak also praised efforts by the police and the public in finding him. While our Home and Security Editor Mark White has more.
Very dramatic events that ended just before 11 o'clock this morning in Chiswick, with those officers arresting Daniel Khalif, bringing to an end this nationwide manhunt that clearly has been a huge embarrassment for the prison service. The fact that this young man was able to get out of Wandsworth Prison in the first place, strapped to the underneath of a food delivery truck. He had been spotted, of course, in Wandsworth at that roundabout, that coming through yesterday, but it was really this morning in the Chiswick area where multiple sightings of Daniel Khalif were coming in. This time he changed his clothing to wearing a baseball cap. Police were in the area in very significant numbers and arrested him soon after.
In other news, the Foreign Secretary says the UK is supporting British nationals after more than 800 people have died in an earthquake in Morocco. A CCTV has captured a moment when an earthquake measuring 6.8 magnitude struck Marrakesh. It's the nearest large city to the epicentre, which took place in the High Atlas Mountains. More than 300 people have also been injured, and the impact of the earthquake was felt in cities across the country. Many have been forced to camp after buildings crumbled, with a rescue operation ongoing. One resident from Casablanca says he couldn't believe what was happening.
The house rocked aggressively, everyone was scared, and I was shocked, and I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was only my house that was moving because it's fragile and old. I heard people screaming, everyone went out of their homes. The street is full of people and women screaming, that's what's happened. Even now, people can't go back home because they're still afraid because of the last hit. The first hit, we didn't feel it. People can't go back to their houses because they're still afraid. Because of the second hit, I think it's a 7 magnitude.
The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, says he and India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, have a lot of hard work still to do before a trade deal can be reached. Rishi Sunak says he's committed to reaching a trade agreement in place, but refused to put a deadline on it.
Prime Minister Modi and I had a very warm and productive discussion on a range of different things. With regard to the trade deal, there's a desire on both of our parts to see a successful trade deal concluded. The opportunities are there for both countries, but there is a lot of hard work that's still to go, and we need to work through that, as we will do. But I think there's also opportunities for us to deepen our relationship in lots of different areas, and he and I talked about that as well, whether it's in defence and security, in education, research, all sorts of things.
16 police officers have been injured after seizing explosives and weapons in Londonderry. Crowds attacked the officers as searches were carried out in the Cregan area. Handguns, money, grenades, ammunition and plastic explosives were discovered. 2 men and a woman have been arrested. Authorities say their main focus is on the new IRA. Today is expected to be the hottest day of the year so far, hitting 33 degrees Celsius in southern England. It follows the past 5 days of temperatures above 30 degrees in September for the first time. The forecasters say the record is likely to continue until the end of this week, with an amber heat alert in place. In addition to the heat, the Met Office says central Britain could face potential thunderstorms from 2 o'clock today. Meanwhile, a yellow warning for those thunderstorms has been issued for Northern Ireland for tomorrow. Agatha Christie's grandson has unveiled a life-size statue of the author in Oxfordshire. The bronze statue of Dame Agatha is seated on a bench in her hometown of Wallingford. The sculpture, called A Monument to Imagination, shows the author glancing up from the pages of her book as if finding inspiration for her next novel. Sculptor Ben Twiston Davis told GB News what he tried to achieve with his creation.
The way the sculpture's designed, you can actually come and, as it were, meet her and sit next to her. And maybe what I hope is that it'll encourage us to take a moment from our busy lives and just drift off into our imagination, which is something that, we won't all have the skill that Agatha had in developing our imagination into books. But we all have imaginations, and if it encourages people to pay more attention to them, that would be great.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Martin.
Thank you very much for that update, Tamsin. OK, let's get stuck into today's big topics now. And, of course, our top story today, the police have arrested escaped prisoner Daniel Khalif. The arrest occurred just before 11 a.m. today after escaping HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. The police force issued a short statement which said officers apprehended the 21-year-old in the Chiswick area and he has been taken into police custody. In their statement, the Met Police said, "We would like to thank the public and media for their support throughout our investigation to locate Khalif, and we will provide a further update on his arrest in due course." Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, speaking to broadcasters at the G20 summit venue in New Delhi, has congratulated police, telling reporters he is very pleased. Well, joining me now is former head of counter-terrorism at City of London Police, Kevin Hurley. Good afternoon to you, Kevin. A dramatic state of affairs. Daniel Khalif apprehended in the Chiswick area after a few days on the run. How happy are you with the level of scrutiny and the investigation itself? Seems to have been a very effective ground game from the Metropolitan Police.
Well, I mean, I can't really comment on that, but it would appear that they've done some good work there, because he's most likely been caught because someone's told him his whereabouts. He's got contacts in the Kingston area, which is only just down the road from Kingston, so it's quite possible that they've managed to investigate those contacts and find where they are, or indeed the publicity the Met's been putting out in the West London areas prompted a member of the public to say, oh, there's something suspicious here, which is good news if that's the case, because it shows there are still lots of members of the public who are supportive of public safety and the police, which of course is contrary to the message that we hear from most people about confidence in policing.
And Kevin, when you look at what was happening throughout the night, around about 3 a.m. this morning, there are lots of police helicopters over the Chiswick Bridge area, around Grove Park, the Chiswick area. There are also police riverboats deployed on the Thames, and also terror unit vans. Very joined-up, coordinated attempt. Those kind of resources wouldn't be deployed, would they, unless the police were pretty certain of making an apprehension?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the case. I suspect one of the venues where he may have been staying, they've actually got perhaps gathered forensic evidence to say, yeah, he is in this area, or CCTV cameras that they've got hold of. The video from that has shown, oh, yes, he's in this area, Richmond, Chiswick. So as a result, they've started to concentrate efforts because, of course, the Metropolitan Police is able to move quite substantial resources like the Territorial Support Group and some of the violent crime units to surge capability into these situations. And of course, the use of the helicopter with its use of infrared search mechanisms means they can very quickly check all the bushes, all the parks and so on for heat spots.
Yeah, and Kevin, that is an aspect of any search. A nighttime search, of course, using those infrared cameras, much more effective. Something that was mentioned earlier by Peter Blexley was the use of CCTV cameras with facial recognition technology. How important are they now to policing in urban areas, and should people be concerned that these cameras are looking at everybody as they go about their daily business, not just wanted suspects like Daniel Khalif?
Well, firstly, I think the more the merrier, and the better that the facial recognition cameras are brought into use by the police and CCTV cameras. The reason being, that van you're showing right now, Territorial Support Group, could quite possibly have a facial recognition camera in it. And as it drives along the road, the technology exists to say, that's Kevin Hurley, he's wanted for burglary in Scotland, and it would be a cause for them to stop them. In terms of the public, I can't see any reason why members of the public would be concerned unless you are some kind of activist who thinks it's invasive. The police have not got the slightest interest if one of us is out walking our dog, buying our shopping. What they'll be interested in, if the camera goes ding within the car or in the control room and says, that's a known burglar walking down the road who's wanted for some particular offence. So the more facial recognition cameras that come in, as far as I'm concerned, the better. It's the same argument, actually, about how much more helpful it would be is if we carried identity cards in the UK, which is something that is long overdue, because every other developed country in the world carries them. And for most people, we've all got a form of them in our pockets called our credit cards, our bank cards, our membership of the library, our office ID cards. But what it would mean is if the police had one with a biometric link on it, like one fingerprint, they can immediately say, I'm talking to this person who we know is an escaped asylum seeker or illegal immigrant who's wanted for deportation, or they are a known burglar who is also wanted. I cannot see any reason why people are being so upset about it, especially because, as you've heard from your other speakers, police, prisons, courts and so on are really struggling to deal with what's going on. What could be easier than a police officer saying to someone walking down the street, very sorry to trouble you, sir, but you do fit the description of a suspect. Can I just check your ID card on my little handheld tablet? Thank you. Please go on your way, sir. Thank you for your cooperation. Or, you're nicked, my son.
Well, Kevin, I mean, it's probably a conversation for another day. I think people have rightful concerns about how that data is harvested, how it's stored, how it's used in a sort of citizen-based, day-to-day basis. But back to the issue of Daniel Khalif. With all of this in place, with the monumental amount of digital surveillance, the numbers of people, it's a very densely populated area, and yet all of that to one side, Daniel Khalif still avoided detection for several days. Is that an embarrassment for the police force?
No, not at all. I mean, the embarrassment is for the government that he should have escaped from prison, which will undoubtedly come down to staff shortages amongst the prison service. Returning to the police, this guy's a young guy, had a couple of years in the army, so he's used to living out rough in the bush and so on. And if he's had the support of a friend or someone who said, well, I better move on, and he chooses to spend the night in the current heat wave in the UK, under the bushes in Richmond Park, just down the road from Chiswick, and so on. He could easily do that, hide in there. And as we know, the weather's quite warm, so not really an embarrassment at all for the police. They can't check everywhere, and there's your shot there. Very easy for someone to hide there. In fact, because he's a soldier, he will probably be alert to the fact that police have infrared cameras, so he may well have concealed himself under sheets of plastic or a load of bits of old rubbish that would hide the infrared signal that he would transmit upwards. So no reason for that. The police have done a good job in catching someone in difficult circumstances.
Okay,
actually
Kevin.
shows you how competent the Metropolitan Police are.
OK, Kevin Hurley, thanks for that update on what has been a superb day for the Metropolitan Police. A job well done. Well, join me now for the latest is GB News political correspondent Catherine Forster. Good afternoon to you, Catherine. Dramatic developments. I understand you're in the local area and you have information to give us about the final moments before Daniel Khalif was taken by the police.
Yeah, so basically, I live in Chiswick. I came out to walk my dog about 9:30 in Chiswick House grounds, and I was still here about the time that Daniel Khalif was finally arrested. It was an absolute hive of activity here. I've never seen anything like it. Every man and woman and his dog literally seemed to be in Chiswick House grounds. And even if you hadn't seen the news, you would have known that something big was afoot. There was a helicopter overhead pretty much all the time, and there were police cars in the park. Now, that's very unusual. I've been coming here for 25 years. You don't get police cars in Chiswick House grounds. I think partly people were out early to escape the heat. It was going to get very hot, people walking their dogs. But everybody you spoke to, the only topic of conversation was this escaped prisoner, the reward. Where was he? Chiswick House grounds, the perfect place to hide. There's lots of green, there's lots of bushes, there's lots of trees. It's a really, really big park. And of course, neighbours didn't have much sleep. I slept through it all, but there were helicopters over the Grove Park area of Chiswick, which is where I am now, where I live. Overnight, in the early hours of the morning, people were tracking it on their phones, huge amounts of speculation, lots of sightings. People that I know now saying, oh, my son was in his class at Teddington School. Teddington, where he went to school only a couple of miles from here. Wandsworth Prison, about 4 miles. And then, of course, there was Richmond Park, a couple of miles from here, closed down yesterday. But certainly from late last night and through this morning, a real sense that the search was focused on Chiswick, and people seem very keen to do their bit. Obviously, lots of jokes about the reward, but a real sense that people were out and about and were trying to help. So literally, the police car came just over my shoulder here along a road that's not really a road, realised it couldn't turn, went back that way and drove along. And then I got home, switched on the telly, and a few minutes later, the news that he had been arrested about 11 o'clock. We don't know if it was in this park or very close to it, but certainly a huge hive of activity here. And I think great relief now that he's been found, but a lot of questions for the prison service.
Catherine, one point that keeps getting mentioned by former coppers we've had on the show, Kevin Hurley, Norman Brennan, Peter Blexley, is this relationship between the general public and the police. Do you think that the swift apprehension of Daniel Khalif, and it seems that the public have been very instrumental in that, is this going to be a boon for the public and police relations in the area?
Well, you would wonder. This is a very lovely, very affluent area with lots of celebrities. It's fairly peaceful normally, but relations haven't been so great lately. We've had a lot of muggings, there's been a lot of crime. The local police station closed a few years ago and police now have to come from Feltham. But definitely today there did feel to be a real sense of collaboration. Everybody on the WhatsApp groups, everybody seeming to want to find where this person was. Obviously, the 20,000 reward was a motivation, but I suspect that was more to provide people who might have known him or actually have information on him to come forward, rather than just members of the public. But certainly, everybody here joking, say, oh, this would be a good place to hide, that would be a good place to hide. So I suspect it will have built some bridges with the police, and I think there'll be a lot of satisfaction that he's been caught. OK, it's taken 72 hours, and we await to hear the details, but it seems pretty certain that he has been caught entirely because the public came out in their large numbers, reported sightings, and have helped to bring him in.
Great, so thank you, Catherine, for that update from the area where you live, Chiswick, where Daniel Khalif was apprehended at 11 a.m. today. Well, joining us now is Mike Neville, former Chief Detective Chief Inspector, beg your pardon. Hello to you there, sir. How do you feel about today's apprehension? It was a joined-up affair. Police helicopters in the area from 3 a.m. for a couple of hours. There were Thames river boats, police boats, also terror units on the ground. A lot of public involvement by the sound of it, no doubt helped by that £20,000 reward. But a job well done.
I absolutely agree. I think the police, the Metropolitan Police, should be absolutely congratulated on this. It was mentioned there about 72 hours, but, you know, you're literally looking for a needle in 100 haystacks, aren't you, trying to find a person who is in London. So I just think it's refreshing that there is some good news, and the Commissioner and his officers can be absolutely congratulated on this good work.
So, Mike, the boys and girls on the ground have done a good job, but tracing this catastrophe back to Wandsworth, what kind of questions do you think will be asked of the prison system, placing somebody as high risk as Daniel Khalif in a Category B prison with a history of breakouts?
Absolutely, and not only that, you've got somebody who's suspected of terrorist offences being put in a kitchen full of knives. It just seems absolutely crazy to me. So, one, which he was in the wrong prison, and secondly, appears to be in the wrong job there. But I think the key thing now is that they'll be trying to establish how he got out, what collusion, what visitors may have helped him, did corrupt officers help him, did other prisoners help him, how did he get out? Because I think the public will be demanding answers, because once the police have arrested a terrorist and they've done a good job dealing with him and get him in so he's remanded in prison, I think the public will be outraged that he can simply, scurry out under the bottom of a lorry. It's like something you'd expect on an episode of Porridge rather than what should be happening in real life.
Indeed, and Mike, big questions to be asked now about the kind of information that Daniel Khalif had harvested, known to have had his eyes on secret UK eyes-only intel. This is highly sensitive information about British Armed Forces, about our communications equipment, about our cryptographic methods. Is this now a case for the military to investigate its own? Is it a police matter, or is it a secret services matter? What happens next in as far as trying to find out what Daniel Khalif knew and who he told?
Well, I'm sure all that has already been thoroughly investigated. The police will take the primary role as the counter-terrorism units, but of course they'll be assisted by military experts and the Secret Service to get that information. But I think that inquiry has already been done, and he's been charged and held in custody. I think the key inquiry now will be how he got out of there and who helped him, because the public have got to be assured that if terrorists are held in prison, then they're very, very securely held and can't just drive out of the place.
And Mike, politically and moving forward now, law and order is almost certain to become a battleground between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party. You know, 'twas ever thus. What would you like to see happening next? We've had Peter Bleksley, we've had Norman Brennan, we've had Kevin Hurley talking about the paucity of police officers, the absence of numbers, the boots on the ground. Is this a time for those conversations? We need to ramp up law and order, because this is the inevitable consequences of austerity and cutting short.
Absolutely, and I think there are some police numbers, they've come back, but the trouble is that the vast majority of officers are very inexperienced. You know, when I was a young PC, there was officers on the shift with me who had 20 years in the police. Now if somebody's got 4 and 5 years, they're the sort of veteran. So that's going to take a long time to get through. I think the Home Secretary is saying all the right things, getting the police to focus on crime, but until the focus moves away from sort of diversity and other things like that, people just don't care who the officers are, what sex or sexuality or colour they are. The public just want a better service from the police. They want the sort of professionalism that we've seen in the search and arrest of Khalif. They want to see that when their house gets burgled, their shop gets plundered by a load of looters, you know, they're threatened with sexual assault or they're attacked on the street. People want to see the professionalism we've seen today in every case when they need the police's help. And with only 5% of burglaries being solved, 1% of thefts, this is why the public lose confidence in the police, because they don't think that the criminals will be caught, and that has to change.
And Mike, £20,000 was on the table for the apprehension of Daniel Khalif. Bit of bribery with the public helped in the end. But in terms of restoring that key relationship between the police and the community, do you think this case will help that?
I think so, because it just shows what, you know, I was proud to be a Scotland Yard detective, and the words Scotland Yard were famous throughout the world as the, you know, the best policing, the new innovations. And I just think the public will see this, and it will make a refreshing change to think, you know, those British bobbies, the commissioner and all his officers on the ground, they've done a really good job, and I think it will help. But what happens is, in your everyday life, too many people are reporting a burglary to get a crime number so they can claim the insurance. They're not reporting the burglary in any hope that the villain will be caught and their property will be recovered. And that must change. That's what will gain the police confidence and trust, that the public know that if they need the police will do a good job, investigate crimes and catch criminals and make them safer.
OK, Mike Neville, thanks for joining us today on GB News Saturday. We're going to have to leave it there. It's a fast-moving day. Please stay with us. All of the updates on the dramatic arrest of Daniel Khalif, that's coming up right after your latest weather update.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a fairly hot week across the UK and not a huge amount changing throughout this weekend. We've got those isobars fairly spread out, so bringing us some light winds and still bringing that air up from the south, so fairly warm as well. We've seen some heavy showers and thunderstorms throughout today, and they will slowly ease away as we go through tonight, so leaving a fairly dry night for many, though a bit of rain and drizzle across the far northwest. Though as we go into the early hours of Sunday morning, an area of heavy showers and thunderstorms starting to push into the southwest, and that's all during another warm and humid night. So to start Sunday morning, those showers will make their way northeastwards into Wales, the Midlands, and later on into northern England, Northern Ireland, and into southern Scotland. And they could be pretty heavy, bringing some hail and thunderstorms, as well as some strong gusty winds. So do keep an eye on the forecast if you are out and about in these areas tomorrow. But it will be another warm day, especially in the southeast, with highs of 32. Now, looking towards the new working week, a bit of mist, fog and low cloud in the west to start, but this area of rain will slowly, erratically spread its way southeastwards, with some thunderstorms as well developing just ahead of that. And that changeable autumnal theme continuing as we go through the rest of next week, with temperatures slowly declining back down to average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Da-da-da-da-dum, etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, agreed. My superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. Here are the headlines at 1:30. The Prime Minister says he's very pleased terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been arrested after escaping from HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. Rishi Sunak also praised efforts by the police and the public in finding him. The former soldier escaped from the prison on Wednesday by strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery van. The 21-year-old was arrested this morning in Chiswick in West London and is now in police custody. The Foreign Secretary says the UK is supporting British nationals after more than 800 people have died in an earthquake in Morocco. CCTV has captured the moment when the earthquake, measuring 6.8 magnitude, struck Marrakesh. It's the closest large city to the epicentre, which is in the high Atlas Mountains. More than 300 people have been injured, and the impact of the earthquake was felt in cities across the country. The Prime Minister says he and his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, have a lot of hard work still to do before a trade deal can be reached. Rishi Sunak says he's committed to reaching a trade agreement but refused to put a deadline on it. Mr Sunak also says the G20 delegates have agreed on a joint message with very strong language about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, adding that Russia is completely isolated. 16 police officers have been injured after seizing explosives and weapons in Londonderry. Crowds attacked the officers as searches were carried out in the Cregan area. Handguns, grenades, plastic explosives and money were discovered. 2 men and a woman have been arrested. Authorities say their main focus is on the new IRA. Well, you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now, back to Martin.
Thanks for that update. Tamsin, welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, on your TV, online and, of course, on your digital radio. Back to our top story today. The police have arrested escaped prisoner Daniel Khalif. The arrest occurred just before 11 a.m. today after he escaped HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. The police force issued a short statement which said officers apprehended the 21-year-old in the Chiswick area and he has been taken into police custody. In their statement, the Met Police said, "We would like to thank the public and media for their support throughout our investigation to locate Khalif, and we will provide a further update on his arrest in due course." Well, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, speaking to broadcasters at the G20 summit's venue in New Delhi in India, has congratulated police, telling reporters he is very pleased. Well, joining us now is Graham Wetton, former Met Police officer. Thanks for joining us on GB News Saturday, Graham. Dramatic developments, an intensive police manhunt. The dragnet tightened in overnight around about 3 a.m. Police helicopters in the Chiswick Bridge area over Grove Park and Chiswick itself. There were police boats on the River Thames, terror response units on the ground, a very coordinated, very targeted, very joined up apprehension. You must be delighted with what the police have done today.
Yeah, I think it's testament to the dedication, commitment of the whole team, the investigation team, the counter-terror detectives, their analysts. They've been working 24/7 since Wednesday on this. They've been working through the night, checking every possible sighting, checking every piece of information and intelligence known about Daniel, where he's like to be going, the route he's taking, almost like plotting him on the map. And you can almost follow it in a linear route from Wandsworth Prison through to Wandsworth Bridge roundabout, maybe on towards Richmond Park, on towards Chiswick. He's almost going out towards West London, on the West London corridor. So clearly they've been following various sightings. Calls from the public have been essential in this. The work from the media highlighting the description, where he was last seen, the time he was last seen. It all supports the information that the analysts and the detectives are getting in the information room. So great work by everybody involved. Testament to the dedication and commitment of the counter-terror detectives that have actually located him and captured him this morning.
OK, Graham, a lot of people were perhaps overestimating Mr Khalif's abilities to maybe escape the country, his links to Iran. Of course, he is wanted. He's facing trial, in fact, on breaches of the Official Secrets Act. Turns out, actually, he was just in the local area all along, perhaps just living rough, trying to evade the police. But in the end, he just could not avoid detection in an area which is quite a lot of expansive woodland, but also a lot of people. A lot of people wanting £20,000 reward, a lot of police and a lot of CCTV cameras as well.
Yeah, very big. For those that don't know, very busy part of London. Popular commuter route down through Wandsworth, along the A3, the normal corridor, one of the main A roads into London. So, you know, he's been in and around very busy areas. And you're right, it does seem he's almost been on his own to a certain extent, but that will be part of the investigation now. The investigation can take a slower look at what's been going on, how he got out, if he had any help on inside, if it was just literally himself that's planned this methodically, because it looks like it's all pre-planned, but did he take his time to get out? Has he had any assistance while he's been out of prison? And look at actually how he's got to where he's been found. But, you know, testament to everything that's been done. There are lots of speculative theories about what happened to him. The investigating officer, the senior investigating officer, said in all his briefings he was keeping an open mind. Everything was available, an option. He was looking at everything, but he still maintained his focus was on the London area. So clearly they felt he was still in the London area, which is why the search has been so intensive over the last couple of days.
OK, Graham Weston, former Metropolitan Police Officer, thanks for joining us. What a great day for the boys and girls in blue. Well, joining us now is former Home Office Minister David Mellor. David, there's inevitably going to be a political fallout after the dramatic arrest of Daniel Khalif at 11 a.m. today. Rishi Sunak in India being pulled to one side. He's saying he's happy with this, but inevitably the attacks are going to come about law and order, about a broken prison system. How big a deal do you think law and order is going to be at the next general election?
A very big deal, but maybe just deal with what has just happened. One thing is good about what's just happened. There was lots of concern that he had inside help, but it's perfectly obvious that he just was clever at taking a chance. He took a chance, but once he was outside, he hadn't got a clue what he was going to do and where he was going to go, and he has been recaptured. So there's no great plot to get someone out of a prison. Look, I know Wandsworth Prison very well. I went there many decades ago in my professional life as a lawyer, and it was right next door to the constituency which I represented in Parliament for 20 years. It's a terrible, old place, falling to bits, understaffed, because obviously nobody gets a lot of pleasure out of working there. Why on earth, this is the big question, why on earth was Khalif put there? He should have been put in a Category 1 prison. And Wandsworth is not a Category 1 prison, it's a Category 2 prison. And he should not have just been left there in circumstances that a man of his ingenuity and capability was able to quite readily escape. And I think it's quite frightening how readily he could escape, and reassuring he's been recaptured, and well done the police for doing that. But lots of questions have to be asked. Why was he in Wandsworth? Why did it take them so long? Apparently it took nearly half an hour when they discovered he'd gone for them to notify the police to start looking out for him. All of this suggests a criminal justice system that is in pieces.
OK, David Mellor, thank you for joining us on that topic. We're joined now by barrister and writer Stephen Barrett. Stephen, so now that Daniel Khalif is in police custody where he belongs, thankfully, what happens next? Because here's a guy, hopefully, will be going back to a more secure unit than Wandsworth. He's already facing 2 charges, was due to face them in November. Speculation that may be put back because of the public scrutiny around this, and an additional charge, perhaps, of escaping a prison. What happens next?
Yes, well, I think actually I'm going to have to do that thing that people find very irritating when lawyers do it and say, look, this is a live case now. We don't know what he's going to plead. We should probably not talk about the specifics of it. I actually got told off very recently by a member of the public who dislikes the fact that lawyers do this. The reason that we do it is very, very important. We never, ever, ever want to make sure that somebody who is a bad person ends up going free because of silly things that anybody said in the press or the media or social media. So I'm not going to comment on the specifics of the case. But I think I can echo David Mellor and what he just said, in that there are serious questions for Wandsworth Prison and for the prison service as to why this individual was in the type of prison that he was in. And there was a very interesting point made yesterday by Jonathan Hall, KC, which is that we all focus on the terrorism charge that this individual is facing. He is also facing an espionage charge. That means spying on the country. Now, 40, 50 years ago, culturally, that would have been much more important. You would have cared much more about that one. That would have been the one getting the headlines, would have been the one getting all of the attention. And I'm wondering if culturally we haven't moved to a point where we're almost pretending that crimes against the state either aren't important or don't really exist. And I can just give you a very simple example of that. It's quite common, quite popular in sort of educated circles to hold the political belief that, treason doesn't really exist anymore. We'll never put anybody on trial for treason. Now, that is, if you want to have that political belief, that is entirely open to you. And I don't have any contra political belief. But purely as a statistic, a matter of statistics, something's going to happen. Somebody's going to commit treason against the United Kingdom in the next 1,000 years at some point. And we're going to prosecute them under a treason law. It's going to happen. So why have we got ourselves into the point where we it becomes fashionable, it becomes politically sort of the done thing for the in crowd to sort of sneer a bit at treason and pretend that treason laws don't matter, that crimes against the state don't matter. Espionage against the state seems to me to matter a lot.
Yeah, Stephen Barrett, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for that take. You're absolutely right. Huge questions now will be asked about what Daniel Khalif knew, who he told, and what that means for the British Army and indeed the safety of the nation. We have to move on now. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney. Loads more coming up on today's show. We'll have more, of course, on that dramatic arrest of terror suspect Daniel Khalif. Plus, in other news, is Rishi Sunak set to clamp down on trans kids? And we'll go live to India, where the G20 summit is taking place at the moment. All of that to come. Of course, you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, on your TV, online and on your digital radio. Well, the G20 summit is being held in South Asia for the first time, with Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron attending. Two big names, Russia's Vladimir Putin and, of course, China's Xi Jinping, aren't at the summit, with representatives attending on their behalf. Rishi Sunak has met his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, today, with trade deal talks at the top of the agenda. Well, GB News political editor Christopher Hope is in New Delhi and is joining us now. Chopper, what's the latest on the ground? We've read about an embarrassing knockback from Prime Minister Modi. He blew out a meeting with Rishi Sunak and instead he had to go for a meal out with the missus.
Yeah, well, I think Number 10 would say that's what happens when you have a moving feast of different meetings must take place. Yes, that is correct, Martin, that there was due to be a meeting yesterday between the PM and Prime Minister Modi. It didn't happen. That was, had to be discussed by Number 10, and instead, a further meeting didn't happen last night between business bosses locally and Mr. Sunak, so he went out for dinner with his wife. But I think today has been a much better day for the Prime Minister. There's been a productive conversation in terms of, that's language from Mr. Sunak, about this chat with Prime Minister Modi. The PM reiterated his ambition for a landmark trade deal, which he thinks will benefit workers and grow trade and services. And that's the key thing. The fact that Mr. Sunak mentioned benefiting workers shows there might be a deal done on visas for Indian people wanting to come to Britain as part of a trade deal, and that's where some of the friction is at the moment. So it looks like he's pulled out the bag with a better result, I think, from those trade deals. But let's hear what Mr. Sunak had to say.
Prime Minister Modi and I had a very warm and productive discussion on a range of different things. With regard to the trade deal, there's a desire on both of our parts to see a successful trade deal concluded. The opportunities are there for both countries, but there is a lot of hard work that's still to go, and we need to work through that, as we will do. But I think there's also opportunities for us to deepen our relationship in lots of different areas, and he and I talked about that as well, whether it's in defence and security, in education, research, all sorts of things.
That's Rishi Sunak earlier talking post that meeting with Modi. Now, what's interesting, since then, they've agreed a communique which has been hailed by Mr. Sunak as showing very strong language about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. I think that's maybe in the eye of the beholder. The language is not as strong as I would say it needs to be, or certainly the UK would like it to be in terms of the communique. It talks about all states must act in a manner consistent with the UN Charter in its entirety and refrain from the threat or use of force. So there's a communique agreed. India has signed up to it, as has China, and that has left Russia more isolated than ever tonight. But whether that's enough to do anything to affect the war in Ukraine, we'll wait and see, Martin.
Christopher Hope, live from New Delhi at the G20. Thank you for joining us with that update. And, Rishi was out there hoping for a trade deal, but the dramatic events of Daniel Khalif have made the news agenda about something quite different. Just when he was hoping for a good moment, he's been overtaken by events. And another storm brewing domestically is Rishi clamping down on trans kids, because it's been reported that the Prime Minister is considering abandoning plans to ban children from changing gender at schools. Sunak has vowed to clamp down on kids who demand to be referred to by a different pronoun and wear the uniform of the opposite sex, which is quite a U-turn on a previous position. Well, joining me now is LGBTQ activist and director of the Peter Tatchell Foundation, Peter Tatchell. Good afternoon to you, Peter. So another U-turn by Rishi on the trans debate. Can you set out what the new position is and what it's changed from, please?
Well, as you say, Rishi Sunak wanted to have a total ban on trans pupils socially transitioning. Social transitioning does not involve surgery. It simply involves using their preferred new name that accords to their gender identity and being allowed to wear clothes that would correspond to that. So there's no medical interventions or surgery involved. The government was planning to have a total ban, but now the government looks like it's going to U-turn because the Attorney General, a Conservative politician, has determined that a total ban would be unlawful under Britain's equality laws. There's also been row back from the Conservative Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, who says that this would be an unreasonable thing to impose on trans pupils. And in most cases, of course, trans pupils do socially transition with the consent of their parents, teachers, and fellow pupils. So it's something that has already and long existed in schools, and there have not been the problems that many people fear and predict.
OK, Peter, Kemi Badenoch had originally wanted a firmer stance on this around the issue of compelled speech, and that was effectively forcing teachers to use pronouns if they didn't want to do. There's a similar situation to Jordan Peterson, what he had in Canada. He didn't want to be told what speech to use. But aside from that, what would you say to critics who said that the teaching of transgenderism, LGBTQ politics has no place in schools whatsoever? It's causing a mental health crisis, and this is ostensibly mounting up to the grooming of young minds. It should be kicked out of schools altogether.
Well, there is no law that forces or compels anybody to use correct pronouns, but it is a matter of courtesy and respect. So even if you don't agree with trans people, I think just showing them the courtesy of referring them to them by their preferred name and pronoun, that's just a common decent thing to do. It's not a big ask. Most people do that already. It's only a minority, a vocal minority, who object. But in our schools, I've been to schools where they have pupils who have socially transitioned. They have been entirely accepted by their parents, the teaching staff, and fellow pupils. They are welcomed. The principle is, in a democratic society, we respect individual rights and personal freedoms. And that must include the right to be referred to by the name that you prefer and the pronouns that you prefer. Now, when it comes to teaching about LGBT plus issues in schools, no teaching encourages anyone to be LGBT or T. The teaching is about combating prejudice, to promote understanding, and to reduce bullying in the classroom and the playground.
But Peter,
and that is the response that most parents.
But Peter, what would you say to those, for example, around their matters of their faith, their religion? They don't agree with this kind of thing, and if they're being told that they must use people's pronouns because they're told to, that's against free speech.
Well, you know, people have a right to hold their opinions, but in a free society there has to be give and take. You know, we are different. There's diversity in our society, and I welcome that. But, you know, we shouldn't, you know, expect people to just, you know, say whatever they want. You know, it's just kindness and compassion to respect the way people want to be referred to.
OK,
and
Peter Tatchell, we have to leave it there, I'm afraid. We have to cut you short. Lots more coming up on today's show. But first, let's take a look at the all-important weather on this Heatwave Saturday.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a fairly hot week across the UK and not a huge amount changing throughout this weekend. We've got those isobars fairly spread out, so bringing us some light winds and still bringing that air up from the south, so fairly warm as well. We've seen some heavy showers and thunderstorms throughout today, and they will slowly ease away as we go through tonight, so leaving a fairly dry night for many, though a bit of rain and drizzle across the far northwest. Though as we go into the early hours of Sunday morning, an area of heavy showers and thunderstorms starting to push into the southwest, and that's all during another warm and humid night. So to start Sunday morning, those showers will make their way northeastwards into Wales, the Midlands, and later on into northern England, Northern Ireland, and into southern Scotland. And they could be pretty heavy, bringing some hail and thunderstorms, as well as some strong gusty winds. So do keep an eye on the forecast if you are out and about in these areas tomorrow. But it will be another warm day, especially in the southeast, with highs of 32. Now looking towards the new working week, a bit of mist, fog and low cloud in the west to start, but this area of rain will slowly erratically spread its way southeastwards, with some thunderstorms as well developing just ahead of that. And that changeable autumnal theme continuing as we go through the rest of next week, with temperatures slowly declining back down to average.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
And still to come in the next hour, Rishi Sunak is being urged to appoint a Minister for Men. I'll speak to the man behind that suggestion, Nick Fletcher MP. All of that to come and much more. I'm Martin Dordney and you're watching and listening to GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle. I know, yeah. Please stop. Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
you should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello and welcome back to GB News Saturday. It's 2 p.m. I'm Martin Dordney, and for the next hour I'll be keeping you company on your TV, online and of course on your digital radio. All the big stories that matter to you are coming up this hour, including escaped prisoner Daniel Khalif has been dramatically arrested by police. We'll bring you the latest on his capture and what might happen next. And heads of governments are coming together in India for the G20 summit. Rishi Sunak has held talks with the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. We'll go live to Delhi for the latest with our political editor Christopher Hope. And Rishi Sunak is being urged to appoint a Minister for Men, as figures show the male suicide rate is 75% of all of the total. And I'll speak to the man behind that suggestion, Nick Fletcher MP. And do get in touch all the usual ways. Send me your thoughts on GB Views at gbnews.com, or of course message me on our socials. We're at GB News. But first, it's your news update with Tamsin.
Martin, thank you, and a very good afternoon from the GB newsroom. It's 2:01. The Prime Minister says he's very pleased terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been arrested after escaping from HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. Rishi Sunak also praised efforts by the police and the public in finding him. Well, our Home and Security editor Mark White has more.
Very dramatic events that ended just before 11 o'clock this morning in Chiswick, with those officers arresting Daniel Khalif, bringing to an end this nationwide manhunt that clearly has been a huge embarrassment for the prison service. The fact that this young man was able to get out of Wandsworth Prison in the first place, strapped to the underneath of a food delivery truck. He had been spotted, of course, in Wandsworth at that roundabout, that coming through yesterday, but it was really this morning in the Chiswick area where multiple sightings of Daniel Khalif were coming in. This time he changed his clothing to wearing a baseball cap. Police were in the area in very significant numbers and arrested him soon after.
Well, Shadow Justice Secretary Shabana Mahmood says the Conservatives have broken the prison system.
Well, we've had 13 years of mismanagement of the criminal justice system by the Conservative Party, and the fact that this situation was even allowed to happen in the first place is a national embarrassment. And so the government does have to urgently get a grip, tell us whether the prison estate is secure, and that they can provide reassurance that all other similar suspects who are in our prisons are in the correct category of prison, bearing in mind the offences that are alleged, and that that prison estate is secure.
In other news, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is supporting British nationals after more than 800 people have died in an earthquake in Morocco. CCTV has captured the moment when the earthquake, measuring 6.8 magnitude, struck Marrakesh. It's the nearest large city to the epicentre, which was in the High Atlas Mountains. More than 300 people have also been injured. The impact of the earthquake was felt in cities across the country. Many have been forced to camp after buildings crumbled, with the rescue operation ongoing. One resident from Casablanca says he couldn't believe what was happening.
The house rocked aggressively, everyone was scared, and I was shocked, and I didn't understand what was happening. I thought it was only my house that was moving because it's fragile and old. I heard people screaming, everyone went out of their homes. The street is full of people and women screaming, that's what's happened. Even now, people can't go back home because they're still afraid because of the last hit. The first hit, we didn't feel it. People can't go back to their houses because they're still afraid. Because of the second hit, I think it's a 7 magnitude.
Rishi Sunak says he and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi have a lot of hard work still to do before a trade deal can be reached. Ahead of their discussions, G20 delegates have agreed on a joint message with very strong language about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. Rishi Sunak says Russia is completely isolated. The Prime Minister also says he's committed to reaching a trade agreement with India, but refused to put a deadline on it.
Prime Minister Modi and I had a very warm and productive discussion on a range of different things. With regard to the trade deal, there's a desire on both of our parts to see a successful trade deal concluded. The opportunities are there for both countries, but there is a lot of hard work that's still to go, and we need to work through that, as we will do. But I think there's also opportunities for us to deepen our relationship in lots of different areas, and he and I talked about that as well, whether it's in defence and security, in education, research, all sorts of things.
16 police officers have been injured after seizing explosives and weapons in Londonderry. Crowds attacked the officers as searches were carried out in the Cregan area. Handguns, grenades and plastic explosives were discovered, which authorities believe could have been used by dissident Republicans to attack police. 2 men and a woman have been arrested under the Terrorism Act. Police say their main line of inquiry is on the new IRA. Today is expected to be the hottest day of the year so far, hitting 33 degrees Celsius in southern England. It follows the past 5 days of temperatures above 30 degrees in September for the first time. Forecasters say the record is likely to continue until the end of this week, with an amber heat alert in place. And in addition to the heat, the Met Office says central Britain could face potential thunderstorms from about now. Meanwhile, a yellow warning for thunderstorms has been issued for Northern Ireland for tomorrow. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Martin.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, and onto our top story today. The police have arrested escaped prisoner Daniel Khalif. The arrest occurred just before 11 a.m. today after Khalif escaped Wandsworth Prison, of course, on Wednesday. the police force issued a short statement saying, "We would like to thank the public and the media for their support throughout our investigation to locate Khalif, and we will provide a further update on his arrest in due course." Well, joining me now is security and intelligence expert and Professor of Politics, Anthony Glees. Hello to you, Anthony. Good afternoon. A dramatic story. Of course, this now is a live investigation. We have to be careful what we say about the specifics of Mr. Khalif's charges. But in terms of the operation itself, a huge success. Finally, joined up thinking. There was a coordinated campaign of police helicopters overnight in Chiswick, the Grove Park area. There were boats on the Thames, police boats, focusing on a very intensive part of the riverbank. There were terror units on the ground. The public had a £20,000 reward. All of this has borne fruit. So in terms of the event itself, a great success, Anthony.
Well, absolutely. It's a most excellent result for the UK. Bad result for Mr. Khalif, but a most excellent result. And in a way, it shows a number of things. First of all, the moment the counter-terrorist cops got involved was, in a sense, the beginning of the end. The big problem here will have been what was going on inside the prison in Wandsworth there, and why it took the prison authorities 40 minutes, an hour to get hold of the police and tell them that he'd escaped. The moment the counter-terrorist cops did get involved, and remember, they are the elite, the British police service, so the very best intelligence-led officers, then a systematic manhunt was underway. But also, don't forget, this took 4 days. 4 days, and what that tells us, I think, first of all, that Daniel Khalif was almost certainly acting by himself on the outside. We can't make a judgment as to what was going on inside Wandsworth itself, but on the outside, he seems to have been acting alone. Nobody was giving him any assistance. And the second thing was that he was clearly using his training. He was a member of Signals Regiment. He understood about electronic signaling, and he was not using any mobile device, any device that could have been used by the police to track him. So that's a really big thing to note.
Anthony, you're also a professor of politics. This is sure to become a huge political story now. We've already seen the Shadow Justice Minister criticising the Conservative government. Rishi Sunak is in New Delhi, hoping for a good news story about a trade deal. But front and centre now, surely, is going to be law and order in terms of the austerity, the cutbacks, both within the police and the prison service. The Tories pride themselves, of course, being the party of law and order. How key a battleground do you think this is going to be moving forward now, Anthony, to the next general election?
Well, I think the British public were very concerned about Khalif being on the run. After all, he was accused, he was allegations, remember that, he was allegations hadn't been proven in a trial. 2 very serious, different allegations, terrorist offences and effectively espionage, using the knowledge he had gained in Stafford, which is a centre for both rapid deployment of forces within NATO, but also electronic intelligence gathering and communications. So this was a very difficult matter for the British government, and I think the politics of it we shall have to see how this pans out. Certainly the big focus will be on what was happening in Wandsworth Prison. And the allegation that's been made by many people, I mean, Ian Atchison, for example, who's actually been in charge of security of Wandsworth, a very noted authority on security matters in the UK, has said, you know, this was a disaster waiting to happen. Too few people working in prisons, the old guards all got rid of, young men largely replacing them with very little experience, and they don't know how to do things. And above all, a man who was a Category A potential threat to the United Kingdom. As I say, the allegations not being proved, but were they to be proved, he would be classed as a Category A threat to Britain in a Category B prison. And not only in a Category B prison, but working in the kitchen with access not just to knives, but also to the outside world. And I would not be surprised if Wandsworth itself was not closed. But, let's forget, this was, in the end, a success story. It appears to me as if Khalif was trying to walk towards Heathrow. I don't know if the police would share that view. He got across the Thames, which is also amazing, 4 days on the run, but not using a mobile phone, not apparently communicating with anyone. The cops had to rely on the public and on CCTV, such as it was. But that too is very complicated because the whole place is full of cameras, but it's coordinating them quickly that is the problem. But I do think this is, a very good result for the counter-terrorist police, a very bad result for Wandsworth.
Professor Anthony Gleeson, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us today on GB News Saturday. And on to that next story about the political fallouts, because Labour's Shadow Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, says the government has questions to answer over Daniel Khalif's escape. Let's have a listen to what she said earlier today.
Well, we've had 13 years of mismanagement of the criminal justice system by the Conservative Party, and the fact that this situation was even allowed to happen in the first place is a national embarrassment. And so the government does have to urgently get a grip, tell us whether the prison estate is secure, and that they can provide reassurance that all other similar suspects who are in our prisons are in the correct category of prison, bearing in mind the offences that are alleged, and that that prison estate is secure. In terms of the Labour approach, we would never have run down the criminal justice system in the way that the Conservative Party have, and we would be ensuring that the prison estate is secure. We would get on with building the prison places that we all need to see to make sure that we're dealing with the problems of overcrowding and staffing retention. But really, there are fundamental questions here for the government to answer. A prisoner escaped from a prison where there has been an escape not too long ago. It is a prisoner who is suspected of some of the most serious charges, and they need to explain what went wrong on the day and what they're going to do about it.
There we have it. This is set to become a huge political story. Well, I'm joined now by retired prison governor and author Vanessa Frake. Vanessa, what do you make of the Shadow Justice Secretary's comments there? Law and order set to be front and centre of any forthcoming election campaign.
Well, I think, as is expected, the opposition has jumped on the bandwagon, haven't they? You know, any sort of thing like this, it just turns into a political mudslinging from one side to the other, and unfortunately, the prison service is in the middle of that. I think. Building different prisons, more prison places, locking up more prisoners, that is not the answer that the prison system needs. We're locking up people who steal a sandwich. This is ridiculous. These people will be far better off served in the community. The fact that our prisons have been bled dry since 2010 from Osborne and Cameron, staff have been got rid of, hundreds of thousands of hours of experience gone. Now we're recruiting new, young men and women who don't receive proper training, who don't receive support. And then, you wonder why Khalif was allowed to walk underneath a truck under the gate, through the gate.
Well, Vanessa, as a former prisoner governor yourself, no doubt you'd have been taken by the comments from Professor Ian Atchison, the governor and head of security at Wandsworth itself, from where Khalif escaped, when he said kitchen jobs are prized in local prisons, pay relatively well, and are normally subject to strict risk assessment, as you'd expect if you put a load of felons in charge of some very big knives. Don't you think, Vanessa, a key question to ask here is how somebody of Khalif's risk was given a job in a prison with access to weapons and, of course, as fate has shown, access to ins and outs via delivery vans?
Okay, well, you know, the police over the last 4 days have said he's not a risk. He is not a risk to the public. And that would have come up in the risk assessment that was completed for him to work in the kitchens. Let's face it here, he shouldn't have actually been in Wandsworth Prison, but that isn't Wandsworth's fault. I think those that should have made him a Category A prison have to take some responsibility, and that is head office and the counter-terrorist police, who will fully have been aware that Daniel Khalif was in Wandsworth and what he was charged with.
Yeah, Vanessa, you're quite right. There's going to be a lot of mudslinging, and Wandsworth has been very, very heavily criticised by all and sundry. Is that fair? A lot of people have been saying historically that Wandsworth should have been closed down or even demolished years ago.
You're probably right. It should. There's a fair few of those Victorian prisons about up and down the country that are really not fit for purpose and have been said so by the Inspectorate of Prisons. The problem is where do we put them? You know, they're not building prison places enough to replace them. So it's all very well making on a whim, oh, I shouldn't be surprised if Wandsworth will close. Well, where else are we going to put 1,600 prisoners? Because I guarantee now we couldn't just move 1,600 prisoners out.
Well, Vanessa, they seem to be very adept at putting 1,600 asylum seekers in places. So surely where there's a will, there's a way to take care of this matter. If we have a system that appears to be creaking at the seams or indeed is broken in the terms of jails that aren't fit for purpose, surely a directive must be more secure and more modern prisons.
I don't disagree with you. What we need is some investment. Some real hard cash into our prison system, into recruitment, into training. You know, this is sort of bread and butter stuff for prison staff. And clearly, you know, there's failings on Wandsworth's side. I'm not gonna hash around the bush here, but you know, any investigation that happens will bring that out. But there's failings on a lot of sides from the government down.
And do you think, Vanessa, one positive we could take away from the sorry saga of Daniel Khalif is this kind of call to arms, this call for modernisation, for more investment, for more recruitment, for a more robust prison system? It seems to have been an accident waiting to happen.
Well, yes, forgive me if I'm a bit sceptical on that side. We've seen this before, lots of talk, lots of investigations, lots of recommendations and very little happening.
Hey, Vanessa Frake, well, we're going to have to leave it there. I can sense your jaded cynicism, and who can blame you? OK, thank you for that. You're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daldney. Lots more coming up on today's show. But first, during this magnificent heat wave, let's take a look at today's weather.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a fairly hot week across the UK and not a huge amount changing throughout this weekend. We've got those isobars fairly spread out, so bringing us some light winds and still bringing that air up from the south, so fairly warm as well. We've seen some heavy showers and thunderstorms throughout today, and they will slowly ease away as we go through tonight. So leaving a fairly dry night for many, though a bit of rain and drizzle across the far northwest. Though as we go into the early hours of Sunday morning, an area of heavy showers and thunderstorms starting to push into the southwest, and that's all during another warm and humid night. So to start Sunday morning, those showers will make their way northeastwards into Wales, the Midlands, and later on into northern England, Northern Ireland, and into southern Scotland. And they could be pretty heavy, bringing some hail and thunderstorms, as well as some strong gusty winds. So do keep an eye on the forecast if you are out and about in these areas tomorrow. But it will be another warm day, especially in the southeast, with highs of 32. Now looking towards the new working week, a bit of mist, fog and low cloud in the west to start, but this area of rain will slowly erratically spread its way southeastwards, with some thunderstorms as well developing just ahead of that. And that changeable autumnal theme continuing as we go through the rest of next week, with temperatures slowly declining back down to average.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Okay, the weather looks magnificent. We've been asking you throughout the show today, because Rishi Sunak in today's Times was saying he's confident that the Conservatives can win the next general election. We had a debate in the studio with Matthew Stadlen and Benjamin Laughlin earlier. I asked you this morning on social media for your comments, and it's fair to say that even amongst my loyal followers who are very Brexity, I'm basically Mr. Red Wall in terms of the people who follow me, the people who likely will win this next general election. Has to be said, very downbeat about the chances of the Conservatives winning. I'll read out a few comments here. This one is from Ratio Watch Ratio. Sunak is not liked by anyone other than his wife. Well, that's a bit harsh, but he did spend the night with her in New Delhi last night after being blown out by the Prime Minister Modi. Maybe that's telling of Britain's standing internationally. The Tories have almost zero chance of winning the next election. He'll go down as the worst Prime Minister in history. He makes Tony Blair look in touch with the people. Bit below the belt there, but perhaps fair. I also ask you, how could they turn this around? Because there's been lots and lots of talk about how can the two parties look different? What are these wedge issues? Because they seem to be the same on taxation, they seem to be the same on open borders, they seem to be the same on net zero. And we've seen even on the front of the Loyal Telegraph there, net zero obsession has fueled inflation. And here's what somebody here called Johnny Dub had to say: actually become Conservative if you want to win. You can cut waste, cut HS2, cut Quangos, cut non-jobs, cut Rishi. Very, very harsh indeed there. And Donna Louise says, stop the boats, start mass deportations, no amnesty for any illegals, delay net zero, just be Conservative again. That is something that keeps coming out and out and out. Although, however, a lot of people are saying the Labour Party aren't much better. They don't seem to have any policies either. Labour will self-destruct, says Equality here, due to their woke messages, with such classics as women can have penises, there are too many white people. Of course, that was Mayor Sadiq Khan, that the white couple weren't representative of Londoners. Let's open our borders. Big Mike, who's a good loyal follower of mine, I am of the opinion that we need a complete gutting of the civil service. The only way to affect any real change in this country is to remove the people in power and replace them with people who are less partisan. Joe says, not a chance. Sunak is despised by Conservative voters along with Hunt. So, got to say, it's been pretty bleak reading. So we're now going to the news bulletin with Tam.
Martin, thanks very much. Here are the headlines at 2:29, and we're going to start with some breaking news at this half hour. Over 1,000 people have died and another 1,204 have been injured as rescue teams dig through the rubble after an earthquake in Morocco. CCTV has captured the moment when the earthquake measuring 6.8 magnitude struck Marrakesh. The Moroccan army has been dispatched to aid in the search and rescue in remote areas in the Atlas Mountains, the epicentre of the quake. Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says the UK is supporting British nationals in the country. The Prime Minister says he's very pleased terror suspect Daniel Khalif has been arrested after escaping from HMP Wandsworth on Wednesday. Rishi Sunak also praised efforts by the police and the public in finding him. The former soldier escaped from Wandsworth Prison on Wednesday by strapping himself to the bottom of a food delivery van. The 21-year-old was arrested this morning in Chiswick in West London and is now in police custody. The Prime Minister says he and his Indian counterpart, Narendra Modi, have a lot of hard work still to do before a trade deal can be reached. Rishi Sunak says he's committed to reaching a trade agreement but refused to put a deadline on it. Mr Sunak also says the G20 delegates have agreed on a joint message with very strong language about Russia's illegal war in Ukraine, adding that Russia is completely isolated. The PSNI says military-grade explosives and weapons which could have been used by dissident Republicans to attack police have been recovered in Londonderry. 16 police officers have been injured after searches were carried out in the Cregan area. 2 men and a woman have been arrested under the Terrorism Act. Authorities say their main focus now is on the new IRA. Well, you can get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Back now to Martin.
Thanks for that update, Tamsin. Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, on your TV, online and, of course, on your digital radio. Well, the G20 summit is being held in South Asia for the first time, with Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron attending. Two big names, Vladimir Putin from Russia, of course, and China's Xi Jinping aren't at the summit, with representatives instead attending on their behalf. Rishi Sunak has met his Indian counterpart Narendra Modi today, with trade deal talks at the top of the agenda. Well, GB News political editor Christopher Hope is in New Delhi and is joining us live now. Christopher, what's the latest from New Delhi?
Well, there's good news and somewhat better news than yesterday when there was a meeting that didn't happen with Mr Modi, between Mr Modi and Mr Sunak, and a meeting with business leaders didn't happen because of the lockdown here imposed during this G20 summit. But he's had a meeting today with Mr Modi. It's been a warm reception that Mr Sunak got, according to Mr Modi, and they had a productive conversation about the trade deal they're trying to sign between the two countries, the UK and India. That's the hope, and the PM is really hoping that this might be a landmark trade deal on both businesses and will help both UK businesses and also workers, and that's a crucial point because India wants better access for visas to come to the UK, and the UK wants better access for businesses investing and trying to do business with India. So I think there's been some success there for the Prime Minister, and he'll be pleased with that.
There's a lot of talk back in Britain, of course, about the dramatic arrest of the escaped convict, Daniel Khalif. That story is being used as an attack point by the Labour shadow, the Justice Secretary. How critical do you think that is now? There's a sense that no matter when Rishi goes looking for a good news story, domestic affairs seem to overtake him, Chris.
Yeah. He's always being dragged back by domestic affairs, isn't he, Martin? He said today to us here in New Delhi, he was very pleased that Daniel Khalif had been caught, and he thanked the public and particularly the police for their prompt work in finding him in West London today. But of course, he's trying to push out any political issue for him, saying there's an inquiry by Alex Chalk, who's the Justice Secretary, and when that report's back, there might be issues there to do with how did this individual escape from prison. But right now, he's trying to say it's not really a matter for politics so much as being a delight and pleased this guy's back in some form of custody.
OK, and I think, do we have a statement from Rishi Sunak? He did comment on this dramatic arrest, didn't he, of Daniel Khalif. Do we have that now?
Prime Minister Modi and I had a very warm and productive discussion on a range of different things. With regard to the trade deal, there's a desire on both of our parts to see a successful trade deal concluded. The opportunities are there for both countries, but there is a lot of hard work that's still to go, and we need to work through that, as we will do. But I think there's also opportunities for us to deepen our relationship in lots of different areas, and he and I talked about that as well, whether it's in defence and security, in education, research, all sorts of things.
Well, Sunak's keeping his tail in the air there. Chris Hope, thank you for joining us live from New Delhi at the G20, and I'll be hoping some better news over coming days. Well, you're watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney. There's loads more yet coming up on today's show. You're watching us, Britain's news channel, GB News. Please stay with us.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate. Both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daubney, on your TV, online and, of course, on your digital radio. Now, on to a topic that really pulls at my heartstrings, something I've been campaigning on for donkey's years. The Prime Minister has been urged to appoint a Minister for Men. Yes, the new office would aim to tackle issues such as reducing male suicide and should mirror the existing Minister for Women. Well, joining me now is Nick Fletcher, the Conservative MP for Don Valley, who's the man behind the calls for this ministerial post, this new post. Nick, honestly, mate, thanks for speaking out about this. It's something that I've been campaigning on for a long time. Let's just go through a few of the facts and figures, shall we, about why this ministerial post is so needed.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible that 13 men a day are taking their own life. There's 88 men a day who are dying of heart disease, 33 men a day that are dying of prostate cancer. Boys are lagging behind girls at school at every single level. There were 35,000 fewer boys that are going to university this year than girls, and the population of our prisons is 96% men. I mean, if this was the other way around, there'd be an absolute outcry. So I think we need someone to shine a light on this and to really do something to look after our young boys and men.
Nick, here to all of that. This is something, like I say, I've started charities. I've been writing as a journalist on this for many years, particularly the education and attainment of white working class boys. The demographic in Britain completely abandoned politically. There's not a single scheme out there to help these young lads, the least likely to attend university, the most likely now to be out of work or training. So we agree in principle, but are there any concrete plans to do anything about it? And more to the point, Nick, as well-intentioned as your motions are, and obviously I agree, do you expect to run into any resistance? Because, of course, we have a Women and Equalities Minister, but we don't have an Equality or Minister for Men. Is this going to run into resistance, even though the need is clearly there?
I think from what we've heard this week, we can see that there is a little bit of resistance, but the majority of the emails, the majority of the calls on the radio have all been positive about this. And people realise that if you have happier men, you have happier boys, then obviously we have happier women in our lives too. So it's a win-win. It's not an either-or. I completely champion the Women in Equality's role, and I completely champion Maria Caulfield in her position as Minister for Women. She's doing some fantastic work for women and girls, and long may that continue. But we do need someone to get hold of these statistics, take a proper look at them, and join all the departments together and find out what we can do to help all the young boys and all the young men and older men within our society, because unfortunately at this moment in time, we are failing them.
Nick, honestly, I'm getting really emotional hearing you say this, because I've been fighting on this wicket for many years. When International Men's Day, I was an ambassador for that in the UK, it was mocked, particularly by people like Jess Phillips in the Labour Party, rolled their eyes and tried to stop a debate. And fair play, Philip Davis, Tory MP, presenter at GB News, held that debate a few years ago. Is part of the problem the fact that the Equalities and Women Equalities Minister is a post that shouldn't mention the word women? If we can't have a minister for men, how about we just have an Equalities Minister and we look past gender? And as you say, we just identify and tackle need where it's needed, irrespective if it's male or female.
No, I don't think we should take away that. I think when you take away these words, it detracts from the role. But we just need a minister for men to put men's issues forward. And I thank yourself for the work that you've done, and I do thank Philip Davis for the work that he led on this. He actually took up the baton long before me, and people like Mark Brooks from Mankind as well. They've done an awful lot of good work in this field. So it's fantastic that I've got this position as a Member of Parliament to champion this. I don't want to take anything away from women at all. All I want to do is make sure that we've got somebody who is looking out for the boys and men in our lives.
No, Nick, I absolutely echo that sentiment. You know, this is not a competition to see who is the hardest done by. Instead, we should look beyond gender, look beyond race, look beyond sex, look beyond age, and just identify need and deal with it. And actually, Mark Brooks, you mentioned there, a very good friend of mine. And in fact, I highlighted his charity, the Mankind Initiative, which is for male victims of domestic violence, been forgotten politically, forgotten in the media. I made a movie for BBC Politics Live about that, and we kept that charity afloat, but it depended on a donation from a member of the public. All it took to keep that alive was £41,000. Worth pointing out, Nick, that was the amount of money that another charity for women was paying a press officer. There's a huge amount of scepticism, is there not? And there's not a lot of money in the men's sector. How would you change that?
Well, as I say, the Minister for Men, that could be part of their role too. And as I say, I've got no issues whether that's a man or a woman. As long as we have somebody who's shouting up, can help these charities that are out there. And there's lots of good charities that have come about, especially recently. Andy's Man's Club is doing absolutely fantastic work across the country. And a lot of people say that men don't want to talk. And that's not true. Andy's Man's Club has proved that if you give an opportunity for men to do it and you take the help where they are, then men are quite willing to actually open up and discuss their issues, talk to people, and through talking to people, then obviously we help people, and that's what we need to do. And I don't always go for that. Money is not the answer to everything. As a true Conservative, I believe that's what we should all be looking at. Money is not the answer. We just need an ambassador, we just need a voice, and we just need society as a whole to care and just think twice about the men in our lives. Ask the man who you know, whether it's your dad, it's your son, it's your partner.
Oh, we've lost him. OK, do you know what? Like I say, honestly, this might not seem like a big deal to you guys watching out there, but trust me, this is a big deal that we're even allowed to have this conversation. For many years, such an idea as the Minister for Men was ridiculed. International Men's Day. Well, every day is International Men's Day. Men are born privileged. The facts just don't back that up. As we said, 85% of the homeless are men, 95% of prisoners are men, 75% of suicide are men. I'd like to follow that up now with another guest, Lucy Beresford, who joins us now, a broadcaster and psychotherapist. Lucy, we've just heard from Nick Fletcher there and myself, the great need to address men's needs. In terms of your work as a psychotherapist, I've done a lot of work around this. Men tend to react or behave or interact in a different way to women. This idea, just talk more, be like men. It's not necessarily the best way forward. There's a lot of evidence that men talk better shoulder to shoulder, doing things like the men's shed movement or in group scenarios as opposed to one-on-one. What kind of ideas do you think we should be injecting into this to make sure that men get the help they need?
Well, you've identified a really interesting dimension to this, which is the physiology of it, which is that women actually release a lot of feel-good hormones by general chit-chat. That actually it's a very well-known soothing mechanism, which is why women can appear to talk about absolutely nothing for hours on end, whereas men like conversations to have purpose because they don't get the same kind of feel-good release that women do. But at the same time, it's very threatening. So as you say, that sense of walking alongside somebody, or even in barber shops, there are therapeutic communities that have been set up in barber salons in this country, because it's recognized that men don't necessarily want a really direct approach of how are you feeling, because that just feels too big. There's too much conditioning around little boys that they shouldn't cry, they shouldn't release their feelings, they shouldn't reveal that they're vulnerable. And what that means is that when they get into adult relationships of whatever sexual orientation, they are finding it hard to open up. So it has to be almost an indirect route. And I think something that I have in my practice, my clinical practice, is walk and talk, where you, instead of sitting opposite your client in the very sort of traditional Freudian mode, that actually you're walking alongside someone in nature, and actually people can open up in a completely different way when they feel that they're not under so much pressure. Many of your viewers will probably be familiar with driving in a car with a man. They can open up in a way when they're sitting alongside you. They're not having to look at you face to face, eye to eyeball, but actually they are prepared to talk. They do want to open up. It's where can we provide the forums for them to do that? So as I say, it could be in cricket clubs, it could be at rugby clubs, it could be in barbers shops, it could be in any other environment where there are predominantly men. But you know what we also need? We need a lot of different male role models. 1/3 of primary schools don't have any male teachers or head teachers attached to them at all. So for some children who perhaps don't have a male figure in their family life, they go to school and they don't have a male figure in that life either. So we need to look more widely at how we can get good role models as opposed to the online role models like people like Andrew Tate, who set themselves up. And that's a really dangerous place for some of our young teenage men.
Yeah, Lucy, just to cut across you there, you mentioned the barber shop. That's called the Lions Barbers Initiative. That's a friend of mine, Tommy Chapman, does that. There's another fantastic charity called Lads Need Dads, and that precisely talks about what you're saying there. Positive male role models for people with absent fathers, because, Lucy, absent fathers, through whatever reason, and we have a whole conversation about the family courts being very biased about keeping fathers out of children's lives, a system that seems to favour mothers even when the evidence doesn't. I want to have a conversation about positive masculinity, because the proof is there. If you put good men into young men's lives, you can put them on the right track. But the conversation for too long, Lucy, has been about toxic masculinity, the very feeling. You mentioned Andrew Tate, who I think is a parasite and has no place in men's lives, a bad role model. But let's hear it for the good men.
That's right. There ought to maybe be some awards about the people who are really lifting young males up to actually reinforce the idea of what it means to be a man, what it means to be manly, without it needing to be about violence or misogyny or being derogatory to other members of society, that actually it's about how do we elevate the young boys in our school system to show them the path to follow. Now, this isn't to denigrate single mums whatsoever, because they're doing the absolute best they can to raise their sons. But it takes a village to raise a child, as someone much more famous than me said, that actually it is about a collective response so that young teenage boys and maybe even prepubescent boys can actually have those role models, that they see people, maybe it's within dance, maybe it's within filmmaking, maybe it's within photography, maybe it's within bird watching or bell ringing, whatever it is, to get these young boys into groups. I mean, in the old days, you would think about things like Scouts and the Boys Brigade and things like that. They're not so fashionable now, but actually it doesn't have to be about, you know, sleeping out in a tent for days on end. It can be about all sorts of other ways to capture the imagination of young boys and say you can be anything you want, but you don't have to be
Okay,
toxic.
Lucy, we're going to have to leave it there. Your picture's breaking up a slide, but thank you so much. I can't tell you honestly how emotional this has been to be able to talk about this topic, and I'm really chuffed that GB News is the channel where we can talk about these things. Shout out to Martin C, a good friend of mine who's been working on this for years, John Barry of the Male Psychology Network, and also Vincent McGovern, who's fought so hard on the injustice facing men in the family court system. So it's just an amazing ability to be able to have this conversation. I'm so chuffed we're having it. And I'm so chuffed about being joined in the studio by the magnificent Nana Acquia. Nana, you're following up on the show afterwards. It's been a flat-out 12 till 3, of course, with that dramatic arrest earlier of Daniel Khalif. What's on your menu today?
Well, of course, we're going to talk about Daniel Khalif. We're going to have a big discussion about that. But I'm very excited to say as well, Anne Widdecombe, who, yes, she dealt with a lot of the prisons in her time in government. We'll be talking to her as well, discussing all of that. She'll be live in the studio. So that's going to be really great to have a proper chat to her, because usually it's just down the line. But with this prisoner escape as well, I mean, it was a dastardly escape and a slight anticlimax, to be honest. Not that I'm glad that he's been caught, but the fact that he was only a couple of miles down the road, sort of thing. So, but it does sort of throw a question over how he managed to escape and the weakness within our prison system, and why prisoners are able to just, you know, do this kind of thing. But the other subject we're going to be looking at is the weather, because it seems that no matter what weather we have here, there's always a problem. I mean, there's leaves on the line.
We're all
trains
dying.
couldn't go. Yeah, we're going to look at that as well. Can this country actually cope with any weather?
Yeah.
Can we? Can we?
Well, it makes
wind. We want wind, don't we? I suppose.
Well, it makes you wonder because there's the wrong kind of leaves, the wrong kind of snow, the wrong kind of heat, the wrong kind of wind,
the wrong kind of sun at one point with the ozone layer, wasn't it? We had a problem with that. But,
that is right. We've had a very fruitful conversation today on the show about Rishi Sunak. Obviously in New Delhi, the news isn't going with him. He's trying to have a positive conversation about trade deal with India, of course. But this arrest is now being weaponised by the Labour Party. Law and order is going to be a huge conversation. I'm fascinated to know what Anne Widdecombe has got to say about that political context. Here's somebody who's been on the receiving end while in office. And by the way, she's also a great advocate for men and boys. She's a great thing about that. What else do you have? We've got a bit of time to talk about your show.
Oh, wow, we never have time to do this. Crikey, Martin, I'm out of stuff now. No, but just the general stuff that we do, obviously, on the show. Joining me, I've got Matt Fiddis, who's an entrepreneur, and he was one of the people who's in Rich House, Poor House. He made a lot of money, and he's been very helpful at helping other people, teaching them how to make money. And also Lizzie Cundy will be joining me on my panel. So it's going to be quite a feisty one, but it'll also be a lot of fun. And we've got so many things to discuss. And as usual, well, we want people to get in touch in the usual way and let me know their thoughts on everything we're discussing.
Superb. And I need to get on your show a bit more often, don't I?
I need you on the 3 to 4 on a Sunday.
I'll liaise with your people afterwards and make sure I love your show because we have a proper ding-dong and you're feisty. And how's the Mail column going?
Oh, well, yes, I did a little... Well, do you know, that's interesting, really, because it's funny that being somebody who is of colour, I get most abuse, a lot of it, from people who are the same colour as me, which is quite incredible, who think that people are telling you what to say and what to do. So, yeah, it's going well, but it's interesting that why people don't accept a different perspective from somebody who's the same colour as them. But reparations will be a discussion that we'll be having in the show as well.
And I know you've got a lot to say on that. Well, luckily for you, Nana has her own platform and she won't be afraid to use it. So that's coming right up next. Nana Acquia, you'll be watching and listening to GB News Saturday with me, Martin Daugherty. Please stick around for Nana Acquia.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good afternoon, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it's been a fairly hot week across the UK and not a huge amount changing throughout this weekend. We've got those isobars fairly spread out, so bringing us some light winds and still bringing that air up from the south, so fairly warm as well. We've seen some heavy showers and thunderstorms throughout today, and they will slowly ease away as we go through tonight. So leaving a fairly dry night for many, though a bit of rain and drizzle across the far northwest. Though as we go into the early hours of Sunday morning, an area of heavy showers and thunderstorms starting to push into the southwest, and that's all during another warm and humid night.